Greetings, one and all. I am the Pasta King, and I welcome you to my map rankings for the 41 Alliance plus Mega Squad 2, a Wargroove 2 custom campaign made by Shadow Mario XLI. During the final stream of my blind playthrough of the campaign, I said I was going to make a video ranking all of the maps in the campaign in order. I also told everyone in our Discord that I was going to make this video, and people got excited. There was no backing out for me at that point. I started brainstorming what my rankings would be over the summer, and I even did a second playthrough of the campaign off-stream. I finished said playthrough in June, and I gained a lot of new insights. I also got every S rank I missed in the first playthrough. I then began writing a rough draft script of my ranking. It was much smaller than the script of today's video. I originally envisioned this project to be half the length it is now, but as I kept reflecting, rewatching my stream, and writing thoughts down, I kept expanding the script. It eventually grew into this absolute monster you see before you. I've never created a scripted video or written work of this scale before, outside of college. I was an English major. I used to write a lot. Since then, I ended up working a bunch of jobs that didn't involve anywhere near the same amount of writing. I would still write things occasionally in my free time and as a freelancer, but never anything like this. It was nice to use my writing muscles like this again after over a decade of light reps. The final script was 30,000 plus words and 40 single-spaced pages. I put a lot of work into it, for sure, but the main reason this video took so long to come out was simply the fact that I procrastinated way too much. I got too distracted by Marvel Rivals and other games. There's no excuse for that. I'm trying to build up my YouTube presence again, and I can't be going months without an upload. I take full responsibility for this, and I'm sorry to everyone who was looking forward to the next video or stream for so long. I may not have a big audience, but I have a loyal and cool audience. You guys deserve better than 4 months of radio silence. When September rolled around and I wasn't finished yet, I got mad at myself. Ever since September 10th, I snapped back into a stricter state of focus so that I could finish my script and turn it into a video. I skipped out on playing Marvel Rivals when Angela came out. I also skipped out on discussing the most recent Nintendo Direct with my friends. These sacrifices paid off, because I finished the script on September 14th. Producing the video itself ended up being more work than I was expecting, and I experienced some poorly timed inconveniences that swallowed up my free time for a few days, but I soldiered on to get it done. Now, allow me to explain how these rankings are going to work. First of all, I will not be ranking the interlude maps, like the prologue I'm showing you right here. They were purely meant for world building, character development, and finding Easter eggs. Those maps were precious parts of the campaign, but they were a different category of experience from the maps that posed a strategic challenge to the player. I want to rank the bread and butter segments of the game, which were the strategic challenges, which also told stories. By this definition, I counted a total of 19 rankable maps in the campaign. That's almost a clean 20. In each map's write-up, I'll talk about what I liked and what I didn't, while offering constructive criticism. It's no secret that I enjoyed almost every map in the campaign, but there is always room for improvement, even in the things we love. This would also be a good time to say that I'm going deep into spoiler territory in each write-up. So if you haven't watched or played the campaign, then you might want to avoid this video. If you want to experience the campaign for yourself, then buy yourself a copy of Wargroove 2 and use the download code in the video description. I've also included a link to my stream playlist, if you wanted to watch my playthrough. Now, without further ado, let's start things off with our last place map. Number 19. Chapter 3-1. City Trial. Somebody had to come in last place, and Chapter 3's opening map simply didn't entertain me as much as the others. It was shocking to me, because a map where you play as the bad guys, or the other side, is such a fun concept in strategy games, and the presentation of the narrative on this map was nothing short of excellent. Moosehead, the mathematical college town where Blue Ghost and Mr. B had to escape from in the first campaign, was now under attack by Clyde's legion of bots. We, the players, thought we would be controlling Cobalt Yoshi and the defenders of Moosehead. But the way the Turn 1 dialogue unfolded turned the tables on us. We were actually controlling the invading force led by Mr. B's old friend Rare. That was undeniably a cool moment when I first experienced it, and I was looking forward to crushing the hopes of the heroes in an intense confrontation. So, what went wrong? Well, I'll start things off by telling you that the issue wasn't the mission structure. I appreciated the free-form objective play of the map with the scattered key locations I had to capture. The problem was that my starting forces were also scattered, and the starting troops in the south were super vulnerable to the enemy hordes. Now, in this map's defense, it was part of the challenge to have them start split up rather than united. There was a strong sense of urgency to get my economy up and running before I got completely overwhelmed by the defenders' sheer numbers. Also, I beat the map first try on stream, and my second playthrough went even better. But the Southern Force was always irrelevant to my victories. They were okay cannon fodder at best. The only helpful structures you had over there were an air tower and a lumber mill town. The mill would always get taken back by the enemy, and Cobalt had plenty of mages pre-deployed to deal with your aerial reinforcements. It was also both funny and ridiculous to me how there was a Starglass Brew potion in the southeast corner. It allowed any unit who already moved to act again, so it was usually a prize worth fighting for. But not on this map. The potion was completely unreasonable to reach given the remote location and stark difference in starting resources. The single exchange depot and 2 riverboats you started with were definitely not enough to make an efficient push in that direction. How the hell did you expect us to get that potion, Eric? Were we supposed to commit a whole truckload of troops to the exchange depot to conquer that narrow body of water? Even if we had the troop strength to do that, we'd be better off ignoring the potion area in favor of taking properties elsewhere. The big healing potion above the northern ballista wasn't exactly the most practical item to get either, but it was a fair bit more reasonable, at the very least. The troops who started near Rare himself had to do the bulk of the fighting, and the troops on the northwest corner island only had the role of capturing one of the objectives via the exchange depot. For being a colossal army of ruthless bots, Rare's team didn't feel very threatening to me. Wasn't Cobalt's team supposed to be the underdogs here? Granted, I eventually got the ball rolling on captures and decimated the defenders like what we saw in the narrative. Before I got to that point though, I had to wade through Cobalt's immense numbers of low-cost units, and that was not exactly what I'd call fun. The map ended up being a slog on both player phase and enemy phase, especially if you wanted to complete the side objective of defeating Cobalt himself, who was surrounded by a mountain of troops, to reference one of Kanbei's lines from Advance Wars. Eric, Mega, Unemployed Giraffe, and I all agreed that if Cobalt had less units, but more quality units, that would help the pacing of the map a ton. Give Cobalt more giants, dragons, krakens, and siege weapons. Also, alter the makeup of Rare's southern force so that they aren't fighting a hopeless battle from the start. The fundamental flow of the map should have been Rare using his numbers advantage against Cobalt's elite defenses. This way, Cobalt would still look like a badass taking down several bots, and Rare would now look like a proper threat at all stages of the map with his unending waves of drones. That's how you make this map deliver on the narrative hype while being challenging in a fun way. The writing was already beautifully done, so this map could have been a serious contender with the above gameplay tweaks. This was the map that showed us the first destructive conquest of the bots, and when I first beat it, I was excited to see what's next. I earnestly felt bad for Cobalt, while Rare was just raising Moosehead without remorse. Rare's anger felt genuine too, as he was gaslit by Clyde to believe that Mr. B was the source of all his suffering, basically. Seeing the recently constructed Mr. B College of Mathematics, MBCM for short, in front of him must have made his blood boil. I can picture it now in his mind. How dare they dedicate a whole college to the man who betrayed and killed me? The way these characters were written was the silver lining here, and I was sad that the battle didn't match them. Overall, I wouldn't consider this map a complete failure, but it was my least favorite map of the campaign, without a shadow of a doubt. Number 18, Chapter 1-1, The Final Smash. Here we have the first battle map of the campaign. One would think I'd rate tournament-flavored maps highly, so why did I rank it this low? It was because it was meant to make the other maps shine brighter. Even City Trial was meant to be a better map, it just didn't turn out that way in practice. This map was a pure introductory challenge, meant to ease the player in, and it served as a callback to Chapter 10, For Glory, of the first campaign. The gauntlet that Blue Ghost had to run through in For Glory was a fun and stylish romp. This map, by comparison, never really heated up before the story-mandated interruption. We, the players, only got 2 rounds of bare-bones basic battling against bare-bones basic forces. Unless this was your first map of Wargroove ever, you were going to steamroll it with ease. I only missed out on the S rank because I was slacking off a bit with my moves and too focused on having fun with my chat. As someone who is still a rookie streamer, I do have plenty of room for improvement on the multitasking front, along with several other fronts. On my second playthrough, I played much more aggressively and got the S rank with 0 difficulty. The For Glory chapter absolutely punched the player harder, and it made sense because that map was in the mid-game of the first campaign. At one point I wondered, would this map be better if it was extended to have a third and final round just like For Glory? I could certainly picture how it would go. The third opponent could be someone like Magnus, who won in a match with Blue Ghost before leaving for grad school. It could also just be a rematch with the tournament's host, Super Yoshi 141, who was the final opponent back in For Glory's third phase. After winning the tournament, Blue Ghost would get interrupted while receiving the trophy, and the story would play out the same way from there. That's what I was originally thinking, but upon further reflection, I gave that idea the boot. I didn't want the interruption timing to change, as that was an important and cool part of the narrative of this map. This map was relatively unambitious on purpose, and that purpose was to set the stage for the greater maps to come. All Eric needed to do with this map was compel the player to explore his work further, and there were many compelling things that happened here. The tournament was meant to celebrate Eric's retirement as admin of the server, which was one of the major themes of the campaign story, as well as Eric's real-life story. Eric's character arc in the first campaign was all about dealing with leadership struggles, surviving an assassination attempt, and then working hard to earn the trust of his allies back. This time around, Eric was grappling with his recent fatherhood, getting older, and having less time than ever to perform his administrative duties. We'll talk more about Eric's character as we go up higher on the list. As for other notable events on this map, Blue Ghost was interrupted by what seemed to be Pond the Great in a new body. Zany Old Coot was murdered, Summer was being incredibly sus, and Q reported the recent destruction that befell Obtuseburg, as well as other parts of the server. After this map, Eric employed a non-linear storytelling technique similar to the film Pulp Fiction and the manga Baccano. Obviously, many other stories have used this technique too, but those two works were exemplary users of it and personal favorites of mine. Moving on, as the player continued the campaign, they got to experience many adventures from different points of view in the past that eventually led back to the moment of the tournament interruption. This map did an admirable job of creating intrigue and setting the later maps, with the obvious exception of City Trial, up for success. It's only ranked this low because there wasn't much to chew on from a gameplay standpoint. Number 17, Chapter 1-2, Ancient Artifact. Much like 1-1, this was meant to be a chill map, easing the player in and setting up future chapters. But this time we've got several items on the board. Like Eric mentioned in the Slim Spot dialogue, this map had the purpose of getting the player comfortable with Wargroove 2's item system. The item list in this game featured a wide variety of effects, ranging from absolute garbage to absolute domination. But most of the outliers weren't on this map. Eric focused on fundamental items, with straightforward healing potions, attack boosters, defense boosters, and movement boosters, which was definitely the right call to make. Another notable thing about this map was the playable debut of Captain Ishmael. His in-game avatar was Captain Sourcheeks, a mini-commander from the official Wargroove 2 campaign. I've talked about mini-commanders a little bit at various points in my stream playthrough, but there were a few details about them that I didn't fully explain. You see, mini-commanders were essentially ascended regular units, the captain being an amphibian, who maintained their basic traits and were often automatically equipped with powerful items to compensate for their lack of grooves, as well as their lack of 5 HP regen per turn. In the captain's case, he came with the Life Crystal, which gave a whopping 20 HP regen per turn. It was a nice item, but there was one unfortunate issue with mini-commanders that wasn't Eric's fault. You see, mini-commanders couldn't perform critical hits just like regular commanders, which really limited their potential damage output. This was particularly sucky for amphibians like the captain, as they normally triggered their crits with ease, and from 1 to 2 range too. Regular commanders never worried about this because their base damage was so high, and they got big power spikes via their grooves. Also, it needed to be said that amphibians weren't known for their durability, like all other cheap units, so the captain's regen could be outpaced quite easily. Thankfully, he got better items later on in the campaign, which granted him more utility. One more element we need to talk about is the lumber mill. These mills acted like villages, but with an additional financial upside. You could harvest the trees for gold, and harvesting in bulk got you bonus gold. The trees took time to grow, so you needed to carefully weigh the value of quick harvests versus waiting for a big haul. The mills popped up in several later maps of the campaign, so this was the time to get familiar with them while the intensity was still mild. I can say with confidence that this map accomplished what it set out to do. I liked seeing Bonji's massive troop numbers gradually diminish due to the intimidation factor of the pirates grabbing loot and circling around like sharks. A special shout out also needs to go out to the funny dialogue that played when you tried to visit a certain hiding spot used by a certain duo of thieves in the southeast corner. In general, It was fun building my troops up with items and setting up a clean final play to grab Slim Kirby's sword. Speaking of Slim Kirby's sword, it was cool to see the Admin Isle battlefield from the final chapter of the first campaign again. The battlefield's loot was in the process of being cleaned up by Bonji's team in the narrative of this map, and we the players finally got to see why Captain Ishmael was approaching the sword in the final moment of the first campaign's ending. The seeds for the second campaign's main conflict were already planted by that ending, and they started to grow with the events of this map. Bonji and his troops would end up losing their lives when Ishmael went on a nitro-fueled killing spree after grabbing Slim's sword, which housed a dangerous nitro gem. While the captain was doing his best impression of Cervantes from Soul Calibur, the young thieves, known as Sneaky and Stern, were watching. The duo thought they were going to commit a little bit of larceny, but they ended up witnessing a whole lot of murder. Ishmael would go on to deliver the sword to Pond in Chapter 1-3, and the main conflict really started to bloom there. As for Sneaky and Sturm, they took center stage in Chapter 2 with their own grand adventure. Everything in this campaign could be traced back to that fateful night on Admin Isle. I respected this map, as it played its role with gusto. It may have not had the overall fun factor of the maps ranked above it, but it had enough spice to overtake 3-1 and 1-1. Number 16. Chapter 2-4. The King's Gambit. I've gone back and forth with this map's ranking in my head, but now I'm confident in its position. I want you guys to keep in mind that the competition is fierce when every map had so much love and care put into them. This was a groove puzzle map, similar to the highly creative Chapter 10X, A Swift Getaway from the first campaign. My character finally revealed himself to Sneaky and Sturm after they succeeded in their trials during the previous Chapter 2 maps. Ringbrush painting was reclaimed, my character's deck of tarot cards was reassembled, and numerous troublemakers who weren't intended to be part of the trials were defeated. Needless to say, these young heroes exceeded my character's expectations, but they still had one more trial to complete. They had to overcome the mind-bending challenge of Uncle PK's Puzzle Palace. Eric's programming expertise was on full display here, with handy reset buttons, tight scripting, and numerous clones of legendary user Casanova64. I was impressed by the puzzle logic at work, involving Pistol's Groove as the star of the map, but Wolfar's Groove, Caesar's Groove, Koji's Groove, and a few other tricky elements like gates also had their roles to play. Whenever you saw a gap on this map, you had to fill it, one way or another. It was all about making the electric chain reaction reach my character's position on the map, which changed with every round. This map was also where I first learned that Wargroove 2 nerfed Caesar's Groove to only work on foot soldiers. I played through all of story mode before this campaign, and I never got the chance to play as Caesar. Man, Wargroove 2 as a whole was not a good game for the good boy. Anyway, I always feel like a galaxy-brained genius whenever I clear these puzzle maps, which is probably something every puzzle designer wants to hear. One other thing I wanted to call attention to was the fact that Pistol's Groove could target and damage allied units. That was always an interesting design choice to me. It was clearly intended by the developers for the player to occasionally make a sacrifice play of including one or more of their own units in the chain if it meant extending it to shock far more enemies. It also fit Pistol's character in this main story to a T. She was a mad scientist and a manipulative scumbag who who was all too willing to sacrifice others to achieve her goals. It was a very cool groove, and I was 100% sure that when Eric first read about its mechanics, he just had to design an epic puzzle map around them. I must say that he ultimately succeeded, although once you've beaten this map once, it loses a lot of luster on future playthroughs. The S rank requirement was basically beat the map, and the side objective to complete the puzzles without going over 5 resets was generous. The other side objective was to find the special second secret space, which didn't involve Slim Kirby. It was a good thing from a storytelling standpoint, and we'll talk about it later, but it wasn't a challenge to find. If the secret space was unlocked via an alternate puzzle solution, then that would add a lot of spice to the experience. That would be my suggestion to improve this map further. Once again, I had fun solving this map the first time, but I wasn't excited to do it again when I did a second sweep through the maps during the making of this video. On the storytelling side of things, oh my goodness, woo, Lordy. On the storytelling side of things, though, it was such a thrill to see my character take a much greater role this time around. If you played or watched the first campaign, then you'll remember that almost all of my appearances were in the PK spot dialogues, and if you unlocked them all, I became a playable unit in the final map. It was possible to miss me completely on your first playthrough, but I did get an appearance in the ending just to let the player know that they should seek out my secret spaces. For this campaign, Eric took me out of the secret spaces and put me directly in the action. I got multiple playable appearances, we'll talk more about those later, and tons of screen time as an important NPC, like on this map. The first campaign established my character as a keeper of magical secrets and a fountain of esoteric knowledge, so naturally I was a great fit to be the Mr. Exposition for the relative newcomers, Sneaky and Stern. This exposition also came in at the right time for the player, as they were surely wondering what the secret of Slim Kirby's sword was. As it turned out, it was a Nitro Gem, one of 3 hyper-powerful plot devices in the story. Flavoring Discord Nitro as a forbidden magic perfectly fit Eric's Discord-themed fantasy world. Nitro Gems could enhance the wielder's innate abilities to the grandest heights, but the more the wielder drew upon their power, the more clouded their judgment became. In my character's own words, when the allure of such power overtakes their morality, they've gone Nitro. Those afflicted become aggressive, volatile, unpredictable, and violent. I said on my stream that the concept of going Nitro reminded me of cyberpsychosis from the Cyberpunk tabletop game and all of its related media. Obviously, neither this campaign nor Cyberpunk were the originators of "if you abuse power, you lose yourself." They weren't the inventors of that trope. But I'm just saying that it was always one of my favorite storytelling tropes, so it was great to see it here. We even saw an interesting bit of dialogue revealing that Slim's actions in the first campaign might have been the result of him going Nitro. He was always a rival to Eric, who resented the maze game. But were those factors alone enough to motivate him to stage a hostile takeover of the server? Perhaps he had one bad day where he was so angry at the maze game that he lost control over the power of his Nitro Gem, and the rest was history. Wielders of these gems needed supreme calm, selflessness, and an unburdened heart to avoid going Nitro, which wasn't always possible. My character implied that anyone was vulnerable to the perils of Nitro, including experienced users like himself. The best one could do was minimize the chances. I also enjoyed the humorous banter between Sneaky, Sturm, and my character. They poked fun at my old age, but I got my shots in on those sassy rogues too. Now, let's talk about the second secret space that mentions my brother, the esteemed warm-up trivia host, Dr. Peppy, who is now known as Dandy Penguin. My character told Sneaky and Sturm about what he's done for the community and what he's been up to lately. At the time of this campaign's release in February of 2025, one of the games he was playing a lot of was Multiverses. But 3 months later, the online servers for that game shut down, and the game itself was officially delisted. That wasn't Eric's fault in the slightest, as his script was dead-on balls accurate at the time he wrote it. Thankfully, Dandy moved on to Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising, another fun fighting game that had much better developer support. The game had a wonderful showing at this year's EVO Championship Series. Anyway, let's switch gears now to the Slim Spot dialogue, where a funny exchange between past and present Secret Space hosts occurred. That's right, my character and Slim's character actually got to have a real conversation, unlike in the first campaign where we barely mentioned each other. I was thrilled that it finally happened, given our history as CSS comrades and rivals in Eric's Mario trivia. The passing of the mantle of Secret Space host was a superb idea, as it allowed both of our characters to experience fresh character arcs. By the end of this map, it was evident that the story was about to escalate the stakes drastically. The time for trials and thievery was over. My character was going to teach Sneaky and Sturm how to safely harness the power of Nitro for the good of the server. My deck of tarot cards that they assembled during the trials would also come into play on a later map. All in all, this map was a fitting conclusion to Chapter 2, aka the Sneaky and Sturm arc. It was only ranked on the lower end because at the end of the day, I wasn't the biggest fan of groove puzzle maps. The lack of replayability I mentioned earlier was also a factor. It was an astonishing display of programming and creativity by Eric, but this kind of map ignored the war in Wargroove, in my humble opinion. The war was what I was here for. Number 15. Chapter 1-3. Usurper. Now this map, if you were playing in numerical order, marked the point where the campaign truly began to up the intensity of its battles. When it came to my rankings, this map also marked the beginning of a new tier of personal enjoyment. It wasn't as tutorial-ish as 1-1 or 1-2, it wasn't as sluggish as 3-1, and it wasn't puzzle-ish like 2-4. This map challenged the player to take what they've learned in the earlier Chapter 1 maps and apply it in a no-holds-barred traditional Wargroove battle against Grim Angel. There were not only items here, but the Exchange Depot made its campaign debut here. The Exchange Depot was a new type of structure in Wargroove 2 that allowed the player to convert land units to naval units, and vice versa. If you wanted to convert to a more expensive unit, you had to pay the difference, of course. These structures, when placed right, really spiced up both property expansion and combat plays. A naval unit can join the fight on land once the seas have been calmed, and a land unit could cross a body of water themselves instead of waiting for a barge or a balloon. This kind of dynamic momentum shifting was something that Advance Wars really could have used in its naval maps. You would need to be smart about it in order to deal with Grimm's undead hordes, as they were powered up by the 2 red crystals on the map. As the turn 1 dialogue indicated, it was wise to destroy at least one of the crystals before going for Grimm himself. Speaking of Grimm, he would bring out a lot of skilly swordsmen via Wargroove, and they could be dangerous against the commander in packs. As for your side, you finally got to play as Pond the Great in his brand new body. Thanks to the power of the Nitro Gem, Pond's soul went from an amphibian-shaped vessel to a Nadia-shaped vessel. Nadia was one of the new commanders introduced in Wargroove 2, and her chapters in the game's story mode were highlights to me. Her flamethrower groove felt random and unwieldy at first, but upon closer inspection, I could easily engineer situations where the flames would always devastate my desired targets. Joining Pond once again was Sakani as Sedge, and Captain Ishmael from the previous map. This time, the captain came with a thematically fitting Captain Saber, giving him free critical hits as long as he maintained his HP at 80 or more. This was actually a clever move by Eric, as it solved the problem of the captain's lack of critical hits from the previous map. On top of that, this map gave the captain plenty of water to swim around in with his effective movement range of 5. As for Sakani, nothing has changed about him from the previous campaign except that he now got to take advantage of Sedge's level 2 groove, giving him impressive activation range along with his usual resets. Once again, I have to give Eric credit for the map design here, because there were a lot of frail swordsmen that Sakani could use to get a big kill chain going. One more thing I enjoyed was the side objective of defeating 3 Krakens, which was a brand new unit type in Wargroove 2. The Kraken was a high-cost naval unit with a whopping 1-3 attack range and a tentacle grapple ability for immobilizing a single unit, so they were a challenging hunt. Everything I've described above combined to give this map a smooth and energetic flow. There were also carefully placed watchtowers and healing potions here to give your units relief, because you had to remember that this was still an early game map. It was certainly harder than the previous Chapter 1 maps, but Eric wisely made sure to keep a few guardrails in. Now, I want to speak briefly about watchtowers, which were also introduced in Wargroove 2. These structures were designed to be specialized centers for the Reinforced Command, as well as providing vision in Fog of War maps. On this map, they didn't matter too much, but when the fog maps start rolling in, you'll be thankful. Next up, we need to talk about the crazy story events that happened here. Seeing the fallen antagonists of the previous campaign and Captain Ishmael fight over Slim's nitro-powered sword was highly entertaining. The chaotic power struggle eventually led to the sword breaking, which unleashed the almighty Clyde upon our server. Yes, that Clyde, the one from Discord. He's the big bad of this campaign. I'm not kidding. Due to the frequent abuse of Slim's Nitro Gem that occurred, our server violated the terms of service of Discord Nitro and was now marked for deletion. At this point, there is no question as to what the main conflict of the story would be. Clyde wanted to delete our server, but standing in his way were the remaining 2 Nitro Gems. Clyde, as powerful as he was, had to secure those gems with his bot army before he was able to carry out the deletion process. Naron, Sakani, Darth Bowser, and Fe, who changed his name to Rare, all ended up joining Clyde for differing reasons, but one thing that united them was having a score to settle with the heroes of the previous campaign. Clyde, with his legions and almost deity-like status in this Discord-themed world, could basically fulfill these antagonists' deepest desires. They were angry at the Ghost Gang, and Clyde offered them a chance at revenge. Sakani already got his Sedge body back, but the other 3 got brand new bodies for pledging their loyalty to Clyde. Amusingly enough, Eric gave them the bodies of the 3 new commanders in the Fari faction of Wargroove 2, aka the Mouse People. Darth gained the otherworldly strength of Rome. Rare gained the mystic melodies of Lytra, and Naron gained the electrifying intellect of Pistol. Pond and Ishmael were absolutely shocked at these developments, with Pond closing out the final cutscene with a perfectly timed, "What have I done?" You did one hell of a job writing this chapter, Eric. We had tension, we had humor, and we had character development for several characters from the first campaign. It was a treat to see it unfold for the first time during my stream. With that being said, now I've got to talk about something I didn't like about this map. I thought most of the east side felt inconsequential because it was a bit too far away from the objectives to be relevant to an efficient clear. The island in the northeast in particular, was just not worth going for, even though there were items, barracks, and a depot over there. Other than that, this map was rock solid, with the story being the highlight, which gets it as high as here on my list. There's literally no shame in this rank, because the competition is just that damn good. Number 14, Chapter 3-5, Double Trouble. This multifaceted map was as direct of a tribute to the original Wargroove's Double Trouble DLC as it got. In fact, there was a Cherrystone faction map very similar to this one. Don't worry though, because Eric clearly took the concepts from that DLC map and made them his own. You took control of two armies at once, each getting their own turns, and they had to fight against two enemy armies, attacking them from virtually all sides. You started this map in control of a small force, consisting of Mistress Celius as Vesper, Chancellor Blarg the Mage, Lord Crump the Rogue, and a few unnamed generics. Chancellor Blarg really got to shine on this map, because she came equipped with Bull Rush's Lance, which granted a plus 25% defense boost, and the Encourage ability. Encourage could refresh a single non-commander unit from 5 spaces away who had already acted. I said on the stream, it's like Fire Emblem dancing, except it's from range. Any turn-based strategy gamer worth their salt already knew why this ability was awesome. It was so fun to pull off hit and runs, double crits, daring property grabs, and more. With this immense power in hand, the Blarg Pit crew had to gradually expand their economy in order to defeat Mr. L, who held a drastic numbers advantage due to his raving fans imprisoning several knights of the Blarg Pit. Speaking of the knights, what was Knight Captain Summer doing during the opening events of this map? She was sleeping on the job, of course! Thankfully, her elite Blarg knights, including my favorite, Gargantua Blarg, managed to prevent themselves and her from getting captured. Together, they composed the second allied army you control on this map, and their objective was to stage a prison break. Several generic units and Fifi the Dragon could be released from their cells by moving units onto the right switch tiles, allowing them to join the fight outside with Celius or inside the prison with Summer. Thankfully, many of Summer's knights carried useful items you've already seen previously in the campaign, like the Hunter's Dagger and Mage's Staff. The greatest decision you could make on this map was to release Fifi the Dragon from her cell ASAP. She was equipped with a whetstone, giving her enhanced critical hit damage, and dragon crits were already devastating, even to commanders. Just be careful if you send her near Mr. L, as he is well guarded by ballistae and mages who can ruin her day. Fifi's cell also contained a tremendously useful Groove Juice potion, which instantly raised a commander's groove gauge to the next level. This potion was most optimally consumed when your grit gauge was practically empty or smack dab on level 1. Since Summer was Caesar, players got to use their nerfed but still powerful Inspire groove. At level 2, Inspire had a delightfully expanded area of effect, but it still didn't work on cavalry, Sorry, Gargantua Blarg, there will be no refreshment for you. That aside, I thought that Eric delivered the goods when it came to rewarding players for making progress in the prison break aspect of the map. Eventually, all of Summer's forces could burst out of the fortress to attack Mr. L's flank, and that felt pretty kick-ass. There was also the alternative outcome of the players struggling a bit with Summer's side, and Celius's troops could eventually break into the fortress to join up. Mr. L himself could even get lured down inside the fortress if you laid out the right bait in the right place. Either way, the goal was to unite and send the raving fans panicking. There was just one catch, and that would be the presence of the bots. Back in Chapter 3.3, more on that later, Mr. L was brainwashed to join the bot side, and that meant that he now had bot backup, which represented the fourth army of this map. At the end of Turn 2, they started moving towards Celius from the west. At the end of Turn 3, they started moving towards Summer from the south. I always liked the idea of reinforcements serving as a time limit of sorts. It put the pressure on the player to get moving and punish them if they played too passively. Eric, you had an excellent idea here, but the execution had a bit of room for improvement. The reinforcements simply didn't come at the player aggressively enough, and to be more specific, they should have produced more offensive threats like cavaliers, giants, or big packs of dogs. Instead, we got a mix of units that were either too slow to chase or too weak to reject a significant threat. For example, a ballista was always terrifying on a good defensive position, but if they had to chase an enemy army over a considerable distance, then they were easy as hell to avoid. The same general principles apply to spearmen. As for swordsmen and dogs, they could be intimidating, but only in packs. With the units I suggested, you would have a real fearsome hunting party that would definitely pump up the tension levels. With that being said, the map's gameplay experience was still a good time. I just wished it had a bit more bite. Now, let's shift gears to the story for a moment. I was personally a fan of Mr. L and Summer's characters here. They were both veterans of the first campaign, and they were still as funny as ever. Mr. L's persnickety nature, lack of plot armor, and eternal chip on his shoulder made him a fun Troopa Jr. style antagonist. I couldn't help but be charmed by the guy, and other characters in the story said he's got talent. He only lost so much because, well, he was most often in the antagonist role. We'll talk more about that later in his other appearances in the campaign. As for Summer, she was such a self-absorbed and sassy candy fanatic that I couldn't help but chuckle. It didn't matter what was going on or who she was talking to, Summer's gonna summer. For most of the map, she was fighting to save the Blarg Pit, only because the enemy force was standing between her and her candy. By the end of the map, Clyde made her an offer she couldn't refuse. 2 lifetime supplies of candy! Do you see the pattern here? When this map ended, the player became fully aware of why Summer was acting so sus during Chapter 1-1. It was so satisfying when you began to realize the chronological order of events. Speaking of events, we also got to see Chancellor Blarg undo Mr. L's footy scran brainwashing. Again, more on Mr. L later. And we witnessed Celius getting murdered by Clyde after she tried to interrogate Summer over the massive pile of chocolate coins that just appeared via Discord magic. Celius and the Chancellor were both effective in the straight man role on this map. A role like that was needed when you had Mr. L and Summer hamming it up. To sum things up, I like this map, but in order to go higher on my list, you needed to be tight, tight, tight! I know I sound like a broken record here, but that's what happens when you're trying to rank over a dozen high-quality maps. Number 13. Paralog 1. The Bone Zone. Oh, would you look at that? It's another map featuring Summer. I swear I didn't rank them back to back on purpose. Anyway, this map was always a bit strange to me. because it was a surprisingly straightforward Wargroove battle in a campaign filled with clever and offbeat maps. I was not expecting that from a late-game side quest map, but I suppose one could see it as a palate cleanser of sorts before the sprawling dungeon of Paralog 2 and the grandiose finale of Chapter 4-4, provided you're playing in exact numerical order, of course. In any case, this map only had one real gimmick to it. After Summer died for her failures during the Chapter 4 interlude, she became a ghost doggo. She was munching on the bones of skeletons, once led by Grim Angel, and the also deceased, zany, old Coot was among the Bony Brigade. Conflict ensued, and Zany was mystically selected by his bony brethren to become the new Lich King of Destiny Isles, with a brand new Valder body. Summer and Zany proceeded to fight it out. Now we gotta say that again, Ogre Battle style. Summer and Zany proceeded to fight it out, with Mistress Celius joining Zany's side as an undead riflewoman. It was really cool how the individual stories of Zany, Summer, and Celius resolved together here in this afterlife of sorts. There was a lingering question of why certain deceased characters from this campaign or the previous one never showed up as undead on the Destiny Isles though. I'm well aware that dying in combat in the server wasn't the same as being completely banished from the server by the power of Discord Nitro. The main characters of this map were killed, but they weren't banished from the server, despite the apparent flavor of Clyde's executions. Clyde explicitly said that he was deleting Summer, and we could reasonably assume that the same thing happened to Celius. Zany was obviously killed by a surprise electric blast from Naron. Characters like Bonji and Grim, they were specifically banished by Nitro users, so I wasn't expecting to see undead versions of them. The characters I'm specifically wondering about were the deceased members of Crystal Star Studio, not the replicas in Paralog 2, we'll talk about them later, Psy Slayer, Mr. B, and the deceased treasure hunters of Jade Star Studio. Why didn't those guys show up on the Isles as undead at some point? Furthermore, how exactly did Slim Kirby come back to life to be the Secret Space host? Was he a ghost like Summer? Did Eric's deal with Slim involve a true resurrection spell as one of the conditions? All of these topics really made me wonder, but I didn't consider it a flaw of the writing, as afterlife systems in a story don't have to be perfectly logical. If you're an author of fiction, sometimes it's a good thing that there's an open-ended mystery about something in your story that stimulates the imaginations of your readers, viewers, or players. Just don't make things too open-ended. Otherwise, you run the risk of having your audience feel less than satisfied. Fortunately for Eric's campaign, I was plenty satisfied by the story of this map, as well as the overall story of the campaign. To swing things back over to gameplay, I haven't talked about the map's gimmick yet. Every time Zany lost a unit on this map, Summer restored HP, gained a chunk of groove charge, and gained gold equivalent to half of the fallen unit's cost. This concept certainly caught my interest, but unfortunately the Wargroove 2 AI was awful at utilizing grooves, so dealing with Summer was a lot easier than I expected. In my first playthrough of the map on stream, Summer didn't even use her groove once. The bonus gold and healing were not to be ignored though, so I did like those aspects of the gimmick. If Wargroove 3 ever happens, and the AI reaches new heights, I'd love to see a gimmick like this revisited. Just imagine the sheer terror of an enemy commander popping off grooves like crazy as a result of your unit losses. That would be a great basis for a legendary challenge map. Now, let's talk about the layout of this map. There were wide waterways in the left, right, and center, so building a naval presence early was the key to success. I've already talked about how I enjoyed Wargroove's naval units a lot more than the ones in Advance Wars, so it was a pleasure to see this map give naval play the spotlight one more time in this campaign. if you were playing the maps in order, that this was the last map with a significant naval component. There was also a fair amount of island masses and bridges for ground unit play. An amphibious assault was pretty much all you got here, because you only started with a few cheap air units, and the only air tower was deep in Summers territory. Your ground troops had to snake around the islands, crossing narrow bridges, or they could catch a ride in a barge to island hop. Summer was ready with heavy defenses, either way you chose, but oddly enough, she didn't have many troops guarding her stronghold. A victory via stronghold destruction was completely viable here. And I've told you all before that I always enjoyed an open-ended map. During my stream, Summer ended up being recklessly aggressive and charged into my death ball of units on the left side of the map. So getting the commander KO ended up being the faster option for me. Perhaps this was Eric's way of communicating Summer's mental state on this map. She was too hangry and stationed most of her troops, including herself, on the front lines. That was a fine example of storytelling through game mechanics, whether it was intentional or not. Speaking of mechanics, that's truly what the core of this map was. It was a late game fundamentals check, and while it wasn't particularly hard, it was no walk in the park either. I said on the stream that I had to be constantly thinking about my positioning and economic state to not get overwhelmed by Summer's well-funded offense. This map was a true all-rounder, with no glaring weaknesses. Its strengths didn't stand out enough relative to its extraordinary peers to go any higher than here, but it was pure Wargroove goodness, plain and simple. Number 12, Chapter 4-3, Magical Gathering. At certain times during the making of this video, I thought about ranking this map in the top 10, because it had so many fascinating, or dare I say magical, aspects to it. The temptation was real, but upon closer examination, I had to admit that there were a few weaknesses that countered the astounding strengths, somewhat. There's so much to talk about here, so let's get started with what I liked. Mega, Pond, Ishmael, and my character joined forces on this map to take back Admin Isle from the bot-possessed Darth Bowser, with tons of items littering the battlefield, much like in Chapter 1-2. This time around, though, several advanced and rare items took center stage. Already, we've got a top 10 level concept on deck. Having 4 commanders on the battlefield was a blast for me, as grooves were firing off everywhere, and this was a recurring theme throughout Chapter 4. This map was also notable for being my first official playable appearance in this campaign. Finally, you get to play as the Pasta King, with no secret spaces required. On top of that, I was pleasantly surprised when I first found out that Eric essentially made a brand new groove for me. I kid you not, Eric used his programming sorcery to modify Merciful's groove to be more fun and actually relevant in combat. You see, normally the good king just went fishing in water tiles, that's the level 1, or bird watching in forest or mountain tiles, that's the level 2. This groove served no purpose other than being a collection minigame, just like in the first Wargroove. That was fine back when I was an Easter egg character, but now I'm a main cast member who deserves better. Eric must have felt the same way, because when my character's groove gauge filled up for the first time on this map, a special scripted event occurred that explained my new groove. During this event, my character announced to the player that he could now draw from his trusty deck of tarot cards. This was already awesome for being a reference to my Let's Play of Ogre Battle. It was also awesome because it showed story continuity. Remember when Sneaky and Stern gathered the deck of tarot cards for my character during their trials in Chapter 2? Well, here's the big payoff! Those trials or just for proving the thieving duo's worthiness. They were also my character's way of preparing himself for the battles ahead. Now, let's describe what the tarot drawing actually does. Whenever my character activates his groove, the fishing or birdwatching effect takes place as usual, but after that, a scripted event occurs where he draws one tarot card, or two for the level 2, that activates a gameplay effect, or effects. There are 14 tarot cards in the deck, so that's 14 different gameplay effects. It's got the chaotic fun feel of wild magic from Dungeons & Dragons, but without any of the detrimental effects. It's also possible to draw the same card twice for stacking effects. 2 examples of card effects include multiplying your current gold by 1.5 and buffing your entire army's defense by 25%. I won't describe all 14 effects here, as I want you to discover them during your own playthroughs. Or you could watch the part of one of my VODs where I find the slim spot on this map, and that describes them all. It's up to you. But I will say that most of the effects were useful, and some of them were definitely inspired by Advance Wars CO powers. Eric and I have always been big fans of that series, so it just makes sense for my character to have a nod to that as well. Seriously, this groove was so cool that I almost considered putting this map in the top 10 based on that alone. Eric went the extra mile when he didn't have to, and he showed great resourcefulness with the game scripting involved to make the groove happen. As a result of that hard work, the Pasta King finally became a full-fledged Wargroove commander. Thank you, Eric, for doing my character justice. And my praise for this map doesn't stop there. I enjoyed seeing my character banter with Mega, Pond, and Esh throughout the various dialogues. My character's sense of honor and competitive spirit clashed with Pond's win at all costs mentality at the beginning, for example. It's totally true that I value fair play and seeing who is truly the better tactician or fighter. However, Pond isn't wrong in the slightest for bringing up the fact that Clyde's bots are our enemy, and they value neither honor nor competitive integrity. My character, to his credit, agreed with that assessment. Also, Mega was delivering funny indie game puns and roasts to Pond by the dozen. Mega's character was always interesting to me because underneath his punny exterior, he was insightful, empathetic, and a good judge of character. He also had a lot of sharp criticism targeted at artists, gamers, and game developers. Hey, just like Mega in real life. Meanwhile, Captain Ishmael was a pragmatic pirate focused on 2 things: getting the job in front of us done, and getting paid to do it. It was easy to overlook the captain in a sea of more bombastic personalities, but he was an effective counterbalance that anchored the team. Pun intended. To add on to that point, the captain's death quote showed the other characters realizing that they would be unable to depart Admin Isle safely without an experienced seafarer. Clyde would easily be able to ambush them at sea. Quite frankly, all of the death quotes are worth seeing for the humorous touches Eric put into them. By the end of the map, I truly felt that all 4 of our characters put on an entertaining show, but we weren't the only members of this ensemble cast. Darth Bowser was the boss of this map, and he delivered a charming mix of Darth Vader references, Slay the Spire references, and even a reference to Denning from Fire Emblem 7. If you know, you know. We also had a special guest star in the form of Grey Ghost, who was hungry for more revenge. Well, not more revenge. Grey Ghost wanted revenge against Star, if you get the idea. And it was for reasons that will make sense later on in this ranking video. Now would be a good time to say that the ending scene where my character freed Darth from the bot mind control was delightfully over the top. You could tell Eric had a crazy amount of fun in the cutscene editor for my fettuccine finisher. I won't say any more than that, you should see it for yourself. In general, story elements from previous chapters and even the previous campaign all came together nicely here, which was another recurring theme of Chapter 4. With all that being said, Now is the time to talk about the gameplay of the map. And while there was plenty of good here, this area was where the map's weaknesses showed themselves. Before we get to said weakness, we need to elaborate further on the gameplay flow here. My character, Mega, Ishmael, and Pond were game over conditions on this map. That's a profound layer of difficulty right off the bat. When Grey Ghost entered the battlefield on turn 3, they became a game over condition. They became a game over condition as well. You had to carefully manage your commanders on this map, and preferably have each of them travel with a heavily armed escort. This was not a weakness in and of itself, but it exacerbated an issue that I'll describe later. When I first played this map, I focused mostly on the center and south of the map. I set my character, Mega, and Pond together with a big ball of units to eventually join Grey Ghost, who started on the southeast side of the map. For the northern waterways and land bridge, I sent Captain Ishmael and all of my naval units with them. This felt like the optimal strategy at the time, but during my second playthrough to get the S rank, I sent my character and a reinforcement of land troops to back up Ishmael's navy. It worked out much better that way, as the south side doesn't need as many troops as you think. In fact, in my first playthrough, I found that I had way more troops than I needed in the south, and not enough in the north. This was important, because one of the side objectives was to destroy all of Darth's reinforcement towers. Every time a tower was destroyed, my character used nitro magic to turn it into a barracks for our army that can immediately build a unit if you had the funds. That big property gain was an empowering reward that encouraged me to hunt down more towers just for the sake of grabbing more properties and denying Darth more reinforcements. The only tower I didn't feel a natural compulsion to go after was the tower in the north side. That tower was in a heavily defended remote area that required a formidable, dedicated force to destroy. All of the other towers were a lot more convenient to take down on the way to Darth, so this map gets a lot easier if you want to ignore the side objective. I, of course, wanted to complete all of the side objectives, while also trying to shoot for S ranks in some spots. So now you know why I had to split my forces in both playthroughs. Next up, let's talk about the item play of this map. The items contributed a lot to the map's fun, but they were also frustrating at times. You see, many of the enemy units were equipped with powerful rare items, like the Hero Sword, Lobel's Armor, and the Verge of Death. Your units can grab a bunch of these items too. It was super cool having all these crazy options on the table for your army. It was fun to make anyone a healer, make anyone a hexcaster, and make anyone a glass cannon. One item in particular I enjoyed was the Necrotic Arm, which allowed the equipped unit to summon a swordsman for the low price of 50 gold. The command was charmingly called Summon Skelly, and true to its name, this swordsman always had the skeletal appearance of a Felheim swordsman. This item opened up fun plays like moving your summoner unit to its full range, then summoning a swordsman that could immediately move its full range and capture something far away. Swordsmen normally cost 100 gold to build, and they couldn't move on the turn that they were built, so this item was a top-tier bargain. Another item I found particularly satisfying was the one Ishmael started with, the almighty Ningyo Bident. It was a powerful item that granted +2 attack range at 25 health regen at the start of each turn. The regen was not amazing for reasons I've described in earlier Ishmael maps, but the +2 attack range was fantastic! With this weapon, the captain reached a jaw-dropping total attack range of 1 to 4. This made him a master of softening up most foes, at land and sea, without taking counters. Ishmael was useful on this map, but he absolutely needed a capable front line with him to perform his best. Anyway, with cool items like these, how on earth could this map falter? Well, to answer that, we need to talk about a few items in particular, as well as some fundamental enemy versus player dynamics in turn-based strategy games like Wargroove. Let's start with the Verge of Death, which gave a defense boost of times 1.25 and the explode ability to the holder. At first, I thought this was a self-destruct ability, like what Electrode often does in Pokemon. But in actuality, it was the holder who made an ally within 4 range of them self-destruct. When you did this, your chosen sacrificial lamb dealt a whopping 30 damage to all units adjacent to them, and then they obviously perish in the explosion. This damage ignored defense, by the way, so giants and commanders took the same damage as everyone else. When we, the players, use this item, we can make great use of it in many ways. Sacrificing weakened swordsmen or battle pups, for example, generated a ton of extra value on top of the value they provided you while they were healthy, all for a low price too. You could certainly argue that players would make more optimal plays with this item than the enemy AI, and I'd agree with you. There's one big problem though. The enemy units in this game were generally more expendable than your units. A loss for them was not the same as a loss for you. A higher unit count was obviously one of the reasons for this, but in the context of this map, you also had a whopping 5 units you couldn't afford to lose. Remember what I said about game over conditions? That's right, I'm talking about the 5 commanders you had versus the enemy's sole commander, Darth Bowser. Darth was just chilling in the back, well protected, so he was completely safe until you plowed through his well-armed battalion. You had to come to him, you had to take the risks, and you had to build up your economy before he completely overran you with his constant stream of reinforcements. All the player had to do on their way to Darth was slip up once and boom, one of the commanders barely got killed. Game over, man. Game over. The enemy was extremely capable of making this happen, as they could kamikaze several cannon fodder units into you and then have them explode with the Verge of Death. There was also a high number of hero sword enemies on the map, and they could easily soften you up for the explosion or finish you off after the explosion. I'm saying all of this not to complain about challenging map conditions, but to critique the fun factor and feel of said conditions. The player would already be on their toes, trying to keep 5 commanders safe, tracking the items of each enemy, deciding which items to give their units, and deciding on how to divide their units to take out all the towers if they were going for the side objective. All of those things were fun and fair usually, but they could be annoying or stressful at times when they were combined with the highest enemy burst damage potential in the campaign. There was no other map in the game where you could just lose a commander in the blink of an eye. That's the power of piercing damage and raw damage multipliers. When I first played this map, I felt like I was walking on thin ice, and during one tense turn in particular, Grey Ghost got dangerously close to death, even with their HP starting in the 90s. Literally, they ended player phase with over 90 health, and then they almost lost it in one enemy phase. It's crazy. Now, it needs to be said that I did end up beating the map first try on stream, and I did get the S rank on my second playthrough. So I want to make it clear that none of these challenges were insurmountable. I will always adapt to the challenge at hand, but that doesn't mean I'm going to like it. The heart of my argument is that it's just not fun to play around the Verge of Death. The hero sword guys are fair enough on their own, as they had lower defense to compensate for their increased attack power. But the Verge felt like cheating. The holder got a big defense buff, and they essentially had big reach since they could detonate a unit from 4 spaces away. I also have to stress once again that the 30 damage from the explosion ignored defense, including from terrain, so there was no counterplay to it other than stand far away and keep your health high. Yes, that was an answer, but it was not a particularly fun one to play out. Now you know why I didn't put this map in the top 10. I have a feeling that there would be a wide variety of opinions or rankings on this map if we polled everyone who played the campaign. Perhaps the widest. I spent more than a few hours thinking about where this map should go, and I finally settled on number 12. There's absolutely no dishonor in being ranked here, because I placed it above several competent maps. And they were competent maps I enjoyed. The boons outweighed the banes. A king rose to power, and magic truly gathered here. Number 11, Chapter 3-3, Ice Climber. It was the rematch to end all rematches. Naron and Salus clashed once again at the throne of the world, but this time, you were in control of Naron. He was no longer the coach of the Misty Mountain Yaks, but back in Chapter 1-3, he signed up to coach an ambitious new team, the Discord Bots. These scrappy upstarts showed a lot of aggression on the field, but they were going up against two championship caliber teams here. The Yaks were now in the care of Naron's former assistant coach, Mr. L, and Salus was leading the hometown heroes, the Armed Dragons. All of these team names were completely made up, by the way, but I hope you enjoy my little bit of sports pageantry. Now, let's talk about the map itself. We've got Naron trying to make his way across a winding mountain road with no air units or transports whatsoever. This was completely by design. Eric even told me this. On top of that, he was also vastly outnumbered. Salus had tons of troops stationed along the winding road, and Mr. L was chasing Naron's troops from behind with his yaks, which was exactly what forced Naron to take the long road in the first place. So how exactly did you win in a situation like this? The answer was some spicy game design and narrative weaving from Eric. Across the map, you found mechanical beacons, and any unit can activate them by moving next to them and choosing Interact, then Reinforce. Once that was done, the player would be prompted to choose from two packages of units to summon, like 2 soldiers versus 1 spearman, or 1 cavalry plus 1 archer versus 1 giant. All of the beacons prompted the player to make multiple decisions that added the multiple packages of units in one turn. You could also move the new units on the same turn you summoned them. The act of getting one of these towers was perhaps the most impactful property grab in the campaign, other than destroying the enemy stronghold for the win. It was all narratively flavored as Naron downloading reinforcements from Clyde. That was a marvelous way to tie the story and gameplay together. Unlike in Chapter 3-1, the bots felt like a colossal threat on this map, because they appeared in droves with smart team compositions that were chosen by you, the player. With these beacons, you were essentially designing your own death squad to conquer the mountain. The bots were cold, calculating, and willing to do whatever it took to accomplish their directive. Not only did all of this work beautifully from a storytelling perspective, but it was also just hella fun to play around with. It also lended the map some nice replay value, and in the Slim Spot dialogue, Eric encouraged the player to try different beacon decisions next time around. Any series of decisions could win, but some were definitely harder than others. The idea of building yourself up via a series of decisions with certain limitations was not new in gaming. Roguelites, deck builders, and Wargroove 2's Conquest mode had examples of this. Eric took what was cool about Conquest mode and mixed a little bit of that into this map, and the end result felt better than the sum of its parts. I also want to give a shout out to the side objective of bringing Mr. L over to Naron's side via Footy Scran brainwashing. Yes, I'm not kidding. If you're familiar with our community, or even just the first campaign, then you already know that we love talking about Scran, especially Naron. For those of you who aren't familiar, we've got a lot of fans of various sports on our server, and the food that gets served at games all around the world is always a fun talking point. We share Scran pictures on our Discord from various sporting events. Then we have fun critiquing and memeing on them. Seeing Mr. L, who was a sport and Scran enthusiast himself, fall prey to Naron's chicanery had me laughing the first time I saw it on stream. It was obvious that Eric wasn't done with using Mr. L as a fun antagonist just yet. We already talked about his role in Chapter 3-5, and he's got one more chapter appearance to talk about that's higher up this list. Also, it wouldn't truly be a Salus map without some dragons. The other side objective was to defeat the dragon, named after Rathalos from Monster Hunter. The scaled menace was slightly sturdier than a standard dragon unit, and he was holding on to a Tensho glove. The glove served two purposes. The first one was that it was a reference to how he could knock you back with just the air currents produced by his massive wings flapping, and the way he soared at you with his various game appearances, including Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. The second purpose was a clever programming trick. To paraphrase another paragraph Eric said in the Slim Spot dialogue, he needed a way to mark Rathalos as a side objective in the map's logic. So giving the big dragon an item to hold was a solution. It was the solution. There were no dragon mini commanders in Wargroove 2 that Eric could use in the creation tools, just in case you were wondering. Along with that, I wanted to call attention to Slim dunking on Naron pretty hard here by making his bonus unit a frog on a map with absolutely no water. Normally, I get a bit disappointed when the secret spot unit is useless, but in this case, it was funny and made narrative sense, because Slim's character had no love for the bots, who were the protagonists of maps such as this one. There was a bot-centric map later on in this video where Slim made an exception. Moving on, we also have to talk about how Naron and Salus had a bunch of fun moments. I almost thought that Naron was going to turn into a big shot anime antagonist with his self-righteous conviction and using Clyde's power to eventually create a utopia for his yaks. Naron must have thought that he was going to play Clyde like a damn fiddle, but the Discord overseer put the cocky coach in his place by the end of the final cutscene of this map. On a related note, I must say that I wasn't completely satisfied with how Salus got away. What is wrong with me? With how Salus got away with the incredibly basic "look over there" trick. Yes, I get that Naron got cocky. He made a mistake, and he was punished for said mistake by Clyde. But said mistake was so lame. You could have given Salus a much cooler and or funnier method of escape. For example, it was established by Mr. L that there were many tunnels and caves on the mountain that Salus knew like the back of his hand. You could have Salus use his immense knowledge of the mountain to escape via a secret route or shortcut. Or better yet, Naron could try closing it on Salus, then Salus could be like, "You've activated my trap card! Trap hole!" That would be so much funnier. And it would be another reference to Salus's love of Yu-Gi-Oh! That would work perfectly within the narrative situation. If you don't like that idea, then have one of Salus's dragons trigger a timely avalanche that cuts Naron off from Salus. Remember, Salus said that the dragons started making their escape while he was being a sly dog who had Naron monologuing. You get what I'm saying here? It wasn't a fatal flaw by any means, but there was room for improvement. With that out of the way, I must say that this map impressed me on pretty much every other front. Number 11 is an honorable spot, worth hanging your hat on. From here, we're getting into the highly prestigious Top 10. It's all bangers from here. Number 10, Chapter 4-2, Forest Frontiers. Fog of War maps have always had a mixed reputation with strategy game enthusiasts. Some players love them for the added layer of the vision game and the challenge that resulted from it. Some players hate them because they don't enjoy dealing with the demands of the vision game, and the AI can cheat to some extent, depending on the game. A strategy game developer has to be careful with the flow of information when designing these maps. The player must always have impactful options for dealing with the fog, and the enemy force needs to be formidable while still having to respect the fog the same way the player does. Thankfully, the Wargroove engine did a good job of making Fog of War feel both fair and challenging. Enemies frequently got their turns wasted running into player units while exploring the fog, and that's great. That applied to the official campaigns and to both of Eric's campaigns. Of course, it takes more than a good engine to make a good Fog of War map. And Eric was successful in designing a compelling battle in Cobalt Yoshi's Forest Sanctuary. The last time we saw the Forest Sage, he was captured by Rare, then forced to guide them through his own woodlands in search of the Nitro Gems. Obviously, there was never a Nitro Gem there, but Cobalt had to give them a reason to spare Moosehead from further destruction. It was a clever survival tactic on his part, but it wouldn't last forever. The bots eventually saw through his ruse, but before they could execute him, the cavalry arrived. The elite squadron of Blue Ghost, Super Yoshi 141, Naron, Sneaky, and Sturm was here to kick some butt. As our heroes planned earlier in Chapter 4, Blue Ghost would use the Nitro Gem embedded in their crown to free Rare. With the aid of Sneaky and Sturm's newfound expertise in Nitro magic, my character taught those youngsters well, and their Uncle PK is proud of them. Just like in Magical Gathering, this was a map with several commanders in play, and this time, the special guest commander was Cobalt himself. Instead of showing up in the middle of the fight, Cobalt was controllable from the first turn, but he was trapped in a special jail cell that only his allies could break open. That didn't mean he was completely unable to help before the jailbreak, though. With Greenfinger's Groove at his disposal, Cobalt could impede enemy progress and scout ahead with his vines. Eric made sure that the player had frequent access to the vines by giving Cobalt extremely fast groove charge for this map, so that was a blast to play around with. Those of you who watched me play Eric's first campaign saw how I gradually turned into a big fan of the vines. They were so freaking useful, and I apologize for being a hater back then. On top of that, Stinky and Sturm were given enhanced vision range just for this map to reflect their thieving backgrounds. With all those benefits, battle pups, watchtowers, and multiple scouts rings, which gave +2 sight range and +1 move, the player had a versatile and efficient toolset for navigating the fog. You were going to need them too, because Rare's forces had vicious surprises waiting for our heroes. Giants, ballistae, aeronauts, and more were constantly lurking in the fog to take their potshots at you. Air troopers were also constantly on the prowl to grab your properties. You'll need to pick your battles wisely. And of course, chain some pivotal grooves together when the moment is right. One commander was a bit of an exception though, and that's Super Yoshi. Like Captain Ishmael, Super Yoshi's avatar was a mini-commander from the Wargroove 2 campaign, specifically Hans the Ranger. Hans was notable for being equipped with a Lucia's Bow, one of the greatest items in the game, if not the greatest. It gave the wielder a scrumptious times 1.5 defense bonus, a succulent times 1.5 attack bonus, and +1 attack range as the delicious cherry on top. Needless to say, it more than made up for the mini-commander's lack of critical hits. Because of this remarkable bow, Super Yoshi was decently durable, and he had devastating 1-4 range poke. Sure, he couldn't use grooves or regenerate 5 HP per turn, but every turn with him felt impactful. Just like Captain Ishmael, all Super Yoshi needed was a strong, dedicated frontline with him to do his job. Blue Ghost, Sneaky, and Sturm were the perfect commanders for the job, as they possessed powerful healing grooves as well as commander regen. Coach Naron's job was to seek prime opportunities to shock several units with Pistol's Groove, so he wanted to stay relatively close to the front line too. Cobalt could stay in the back with Super Yoshi once he was released, as his vines gave him considerable reach. Cobalt's jail cell was located in the center of the map, and Rare was stationed roughly in the southwest of the map. You had 2 routes to choose from essentially, the northern route, that houses the Slim Spot, or the southern route, where the door to Cobalt's cell is. You already know I split my army to accomplish everything. There were multiple barracks and a watchtower on the way to Rare, so the map was accommodating to either approach. With everything I've said here, this map sounds perfect, right? Well, there was one little thing that bothered me a bit. It was not so much a flaw as it was a missed opportunity for some fun extra challenge. You see, early on in the map, some sneaky reinforcements try to attack your flank from the southeast corner of the map. This could have been a great way to add tension to the map, as the bots could have threatened to surround our heroes. It was a cool idea on paper, but in practice the attack from behind was easily repelled, and then it was back to our regularly scheduled programming. There was clearly room for improvement. I demand more challenge, Eric. Other than that, this map was just stellar. It felt so buttery smooth to play from start to finish, and the only other thing keeping it from getting ranked higher was the story and dialogue not quite reaching for the stars. There was nothing straight up bad about the storytelling here, but it didn't reach the same heights as certain other maps in terms of comedy, drama, and charm. Sneaky, Sturm, and Naron were hilarious scene stealers like they usually were. Cobalt was great in 3-1, and pretty good here. Those four characters weren't the issue for me. The issue was that I wasn't wowed by Blue Ghost or Super Yoshi's characters here. They were adequate in their roles, but they just weren't as entertaining to me as the rest of this map's cast, or the other major characters of this campaign. Blue Ghost was one of those characters who already went through their charming hero's journey in the first campaign. They're as developed as they're going to get, and they didn't really have a compelling character arc in this campaign. He still played an important role as a veteran fighter and an inspiring leader, but they just didn't get into as many interesting situations as Grey Ghost or most of the other returning characters did. As for Super Yoshi, I liked his hosting shtick in the Battlefield Arena maps from both campaigns, but on this map, he didn't have any moments that stood out to me. As for the boss of this map, Rare was pretty good here, and it was nice to see him freed from the brainwashing, but his best moments were in 3-1 and 1-3. Okay, that's about it for my nitpicking. I hope you guys understand that we're in the top 10. You could fully expect nitpicks to be among the deciding factors when the remaining maps kick this much ass. Overall, this map should serve as a blueprint on how to design an immaculate, traditional Fog of War map. Number 9, Chapter 3-2, The Siege of Obtusberg. Ah, it's good to be back in Obtusberg again. The water is clean, the snow is beautiful, the emotes are creating art without AI, there's not a remake in sight. And what are all those bots doing here? We must defend the spire once again, right? Wrong! In this whopper of a map, you were in control of Darth Bowser, who embraced the bot side, after Emperor Clyde offered him unlimited power! Just like in the other bot maps, we had to crush the hopes and dreams of the heroes. This time hit differently though. It had a big fight feel, and there was a tension in the air, unmatched by any other map in this campaign before this one numerically. This was because of two things. The first one was the fact that it took place in Obtusberg, the hometown of Mega and the Ghost Gang. The second one was obviously the presence of the Ghost Gang themselves. Grey Ghost, Red Ghost, Orange Ghost, Yellow Ghost, and Black Ghost were fired up to defend their home. Blue Ghost and Mega were traveling to Eric's retirement ceremony at the Battlefield Arena while all of this was happening. So that was another fine example of the story's timeline coming together as you play. This map had such a gravitas to it, as if it was meant to be the climax of Chapter 3. Eric put a ton of effort into all of his maps, of course, but this one felt extra special for its connection to key characters. There's also the aura of Grey Ghost that we have to talk about. Grey Ghost was always presented as a powerful fighter in Eric's universe, and it always felt to me like we haven't seen that. It felt like we haven't even seen their full capacity for destruction yet. It's like Blue Ghost is Mega Man X and Grey Ghost is Zero. Blue Ghost is a kind-hearted protector with amazing adaptability, inspiring positivity, and a virtual immunity to corruption. Gray Ghost is a badass protector with raw power, martial discipline, and a troubled history of corruption. Hey, before you call me crazy, think about it. These emotes were created to bring happiness to the server, just like how Reploids were originally created to support humanity's future. The bots were just robots, while the emotes had humanity to them, just like Reploids. Funny Mega Man X comparisons aside, my main point was that Gray Ghost could very well be the most powerful being on the server, and this map provided strong evidence in my favor. Gray Ghost was naturally the big boss of this map, and Eric enhanced their defense to insane levels. They will take single-digit damage from almost everything, so it's just not worth trying to take them down. Eric compared Gray Ghost's role on this map to Lu Bu from Dynasty Warriors, and I consider that an excellent comparison based on the videos I've seen about Lu Bu. Thankfully, the main objective was to slay the Spire, aka the Stronghold, in 12 turns or less. Unless you're hungry for the extra challenge, then listen carefully. Do not pursue Gray Ghost. Eric told me that defeating Gray Ghost was possible, and there was dialogue that he wrote for the occasion, but no one has been able to pull it off yet. Not even him, not even me. If any of you want to take a stab at this special challenge, then I recommend using a Witch's Hex ability somewhere in your game plan. That will do a flat 10 damage to Gray Ghost guaranteed, but remember, you only have 12 turns to play around with. Regardless of whether you try to defeat the Gray Juggernaut or slay the Spire, you have to fight the other generals of the Ghost Gang first, who were all differently colored Mershas. Only Gray Ghost had the power of Dark Mersha though. Don't call them a palette swap. Each Ghost was in command of several generic units, with some of them having names corresponding to other beloved emotes on our Discord server. One of the side objectives required you to defeat all of the ghosts, besides Gray, which was not easy in the slightest given the map's turn limit. The Spire's defenses were varied and well planned out, but Darth came with a badass fighting force of his own, along with the perpetually fun Crystal Heart Groove of Rome. I explained it on the stream, but it's a great groove for a lot of things, including slaying spires. You could run wild plays like visiting the Slim Spot and then taking out a unit or building in one turn. You also had some nice items on deck to help in making your way downtown. The second side objective of this map required you to make a detour east of the central lake to find a map to the Hall of Emotes. It was a very simple objective to fulfill, as you could send any unit there. Darth wasn't required to touch it himself. For the main objective, there were 3 routes into Obtuseburg. The southern route was the most intuitive path between your starting location and the Spire, but it was also the most heavily guarded. The central route was a bit less intense, but you had to swing around the big lake or use appropriate transports to cross it. The northern route took even longer to cross, but the upside was that hardly any troops were stationed there. Personally, I sent most of my troops down the southern route, as time was of the essence on this map and I wanted to complete the side objectives. 3 of the Ghost Gang generals were in the southwest part of the map, so it made a lot of sense. Not everyone will like the turn limit on this map, but to me it was exhilarating. I really had to make every turn count, and make hard unit sacrifices at times. Gray Ghost being a near immortal obstacle also contributed to this map's epic and dire vibes. It's hard to make bosses properly menacing in the Wargroove engine, as any vanilla unit, even commanders, will crumble quickly when under fire from multiple units and grooves. Modding unit defense does help in this regard, but a designer has to be careful with the tuning to avoid a situation where the player gets bored chipping away at a boss's health for several turns. The approach Eric took to Gray Ghost on this map was a clever way of getting around this issue. Gray Ghost got to be a badass who the player had to respect, and the player didn't have to subject themselves to a long drawn-out war of attrition. My only suggested change for this map would be to make the northern side of the map a bit more compelling. There was no real reason to push beyond the Hall of Emotes map location and into the northeast corner where the trebuchet is. Maybe the map location and or the locations of some of the ghost gangs should have been shuffled so that if the player wanted to complete all side objectives, they would need to explore the whole map. This was a nitpick, of course, as I greatly appreciated the map as it was. It managed to avoid the pitfalls of City Trial by giving Darf strong pre-deployed forces and asking the player to decide how to split their forces, instead of forcing a chunk of your forces into no man's land. Now, allow me to tell you about how much I enjoyed the cutscenes. I loved the banter between the emotes at the start of the map, and Darf's reactions to them were great. I also appreciated how both Slim and Darf's characters connected to this map. Darf's connection was that he was, and still is, an avid Slay the Spire player. Many of us in the server love that game too, including me. I'm still very much excited for the sequel. Take all the time you need, Mega Crit. Make it shine. Darf also brought up his history with Blue Ghost in the previous campaigns, and through Clyde's manipulation, he believed that he lost his previous battle only due to Discord Nitro. Therefore, there had to be a Nitro Gem in Blue Ghost's hometown, right? It was very devious on Clyde's part, and it was all in service of his master plan. As for Slim, his connection was obviously his legendary grudge against the Maze Game. Remember when I talked about how Slim didn't want to help the bots with good unit rewards? He made a huge exception here, just because of Twospur was the home of those damn Maze Game ghosts. The Slimster hooked Darf up with warp gates, which were super handy in Wargroove 2's Dormal Story campaign. Make no mistake though, Slim still hated the bots, but his hatred of the Maze Game took priority in this moment. I enjoyed seeing these shades of grey to Slim's character throughout the campaign. He may have been playing nice for the most part, but there was still a part of him that wanted revenge on the Maze Game duo and full control of the server. When the map concluded, we saw another notable cutscene where Grey Ghost, despite failing to defend the Spire, managed to wound Clyde and escape with their life. No one else in the story has been able to do that to him yet. This moment showed us that despite his vast digital powers, he was nowhere near invincible. Grey Ghost didn't even need a Nitro Gem to wound Clyde. This was yet another piece of decisive evidence supporting my Grey Ghost power level propaganda. Grey Ghost was more than just a badass on this map though. We got to see a more tender, sensitive side of them when they learned about the fate of their close friend Bonji. We'll talk more about Bonji later. Anyway, this map was superbly done, and I left it feeling like I experienced a momentous season finale of a TV series. Only the Elite 8 remaining maps can overpower this contender. Number 8, Chapter 4-1. The Final Smash Redux. The first 3 chapters of this grandiose campaign showed us many tales of desperation, bravery, tragedy, comedy, and survival that took place all around the server. As different as they were from each other, all of them were connected to the impending bot calamity. If you completed every map, or even most of the maps up to this point, then you were ready for all roads to lead back to the moment of the tournament interruption at the end of Chapter 1-1. You knew exactly why the interruption happened, and you also knew that Naron, under Clyde's control, was the one who killed Zany. The final cutscene of Chapter 1-1 made it look like Pond summoned someone to kill Zany, but the wily usurper was actually innocent. In fact, Pond actually came all this way to help, along with Captain Eshmael. A now fully online Naron.exe and his seemingly endless bot goons were besieging the battlefield arena, so our heroes could use all the help they could get. Blue Ghost was already ready to fight, since they were already competing in the tournament. Mega and Eric leaped down from the stands to come to Blue Ghost's aid. Super Yoshi put down the microphone and activated helpful structures that he was originally saving for the final round. The fight was on, and your team was completely surrounded. You had a stronghold in the middle of the map that you had to defend, for multiple practical reasons and one humorous one. You see, Super Yoshi said that the Battlefield Arena's medical team was inside the stronghold, treating spectators who were wounded by the bots. This bit of lore also served as a narrative justification as to why the commanders could fall on this map without giving the player a game over. Fallen commanders got a fun bit of dialogue, and then they made a tactical retreat as if they were a plot-armored character in Fire Emblem. With that being said, both of the side objectives revolved around not losing commanders, so I naturally aimed to keep all of them standing during my playthrough. Keeping Blue Ghost, Mega, and Eric up was one side objective. Keeping Pond, Eshmael, and Super Yoshi up was the other one. As a result of these groupings, you didn't have to keep all 6 of them alive in one run. The humorous reason for defending the stronghold was only revealed if you let it fall. If that happened, then Super Yoshi revealed to everyone that the stronghold also contained a whole bunch of fireworks meant for the closing ceremonies of Eric's retirement, and there was enough combined explosive power in there to turn the entire Battlefield Arena into a crater. The other commanders were naturally angry at him for this last-minute news, as the defeat screen arrived with a bang. It was bad enough to lose doctors and civilians, but now absolutely no one would leave the arena alive. I only learned about this funny game over scene from Eric's notes, so once again, I thank him for sharing that with me. After seeing the scene for myself, my nerd brain immediately went into what-if mode. Would the heroes still be able to win the war if everyone in the Battlefield Arena lost their lives? The answer was more than likely a big fat no. Because every commander on this map played a pivotal role in later maps, and the remaining heroes would be down to 1 Nitro Gem, since Blue Ghost had one in their crown. Still, it would be a fun dark timeline to witness in a cutscene or mini-campaign. We would see the remaining heroes mount a valiant last stand that would ultimately end in their deaths. I'm not saying Eric or anyone else has to make that a reality, but it's fun to think about. Anyway, that was just me talking about the sole condition for defeat. To win this map, the player had to defeat a grand total of 50 enemy units, and they needed to do it in 7 turns or less for the S rank. There was a handy objective tracker in the upper corners that was nice of Eric to include. The objective of routing 50 enemies was a perfectly fitting one, given the Smash Bros. Thematics of the location and the situation. With 6 commanders in tight spaces surrounded by over 50 units, it felt like a multi-man brawl. Players had to either create choke points via unit blockades, or utilize natural choke points like rivers, mountains, and bridges. Also, synergistic groove usage was important for making power plays, just like on the other multi-commander maps. You had Healing Aura, you had Elder Shield, aka Mega Shards, Blade Dash, and Fire Dance at your disposal here. Speaking of Blade Dash, this was one of only 2 battle maps where you could play as Eric and use this groove. The reasons for that will make sense soon, I promise. I also want to call attention to Eshmael and Super Yoshi. This was one of only 2 maps where both of them were playable. Eshmael had his trusty Bident, and Super Yoshi had his reliable bow. I've already talked about those exquisite weapons earlier on this list, and they were boons on this map too. With the confined space and unit density I already mentioned, both mini-commanders had a whole shooting gallery in front of them. It was no sweat finding safe pot shots for them to take. Slim's secret space also needs to be brought up for the cheeky way it affected the gameplay here. You see, Slim spawned a bunch of enemy giants, but they were weakened down to 10 HP. There was a high chance that they eliminate themselves, attacking a structure before they could attack your army. Slim helped us reach our 50 takedown goal, but he did so in adversarial fashion. You know the term backhanded compliment? Slim's little stunt was what I would call backhanded assistance. Another matter I want to address is the map's difficulty. This was the easiest map of Chapter 4, but that was fine by me considering it was the chapter opener. It was the direct continuation of Chapter 1-1, and there was more gameplay meat to sink my teeth into this time. My dopamine went up whenever the enemy counter went down, and I relished planning my turns out to get as many eliminations as possible. This map was simple, yet it had the right mix of being a unique experience from the other maps via the objective and having a big storytelling payoff. The latter is what I want to talk about next. Pond was obviously not immediately welcomed by most of the team, especially Eric. Eric had every reason to be hostile to Pond, given the whole betrayal and murder attempt at TV spoilers. Mega, on the other hand, sensed that something had changed within Pond. He was not the exact same treacherous schemer from the last campaign. Before this map, Pond started to show some positive changes after interacting with travelers on the way to the battlefield arena. That was Chapter 3's interlude map, just in case you were wondering. Of course, there was still a lot of growing for Pond to do. Eric wasn't going to forgive him just because he began the process of turning over a new leaf. Mega and Eric did a little bit of headbutting over this, along with their usual banter. It was going to take time for the majority of the server's defenders to forgive Pond. But for the time being, they had to work together to defeat Clyde. On top of that, we saw the return of my character at the end of the map. The King of Pasta had such a cool entrance as he spouted badass quotes and did a little force lightning on Naron's minions. He came with two powerful friends too. The now expertly trained Nitro Jedi duo, known as Sneaky and Stir, arrived on the scene to perform their Ravioli Ravager on Naron himself. The Nitro Fuel technique freed Naron from Clyde's control, and he was more than eager to join with the heroes after a GeoGuessr break. As for Q, she was also on full journalistic duty, spreading the truth about the server situation, with a bit of marketing spin, of course. Just look at all these plot threads resolving at once. Almost everyone is here. So many moments in chapters 1 through 3 led to this map, and again, Eric succeeded in getting me excited for what came next. The Chapter 4 interlude was unlocked right after completing this map, and it delved right into the battle planning that directly led to Chapter 4-2 and Chapter 4-3. We also got to see the tragicomic death of Summer. The sweet treat seeker did exactly what Clyde asked, but because the assault on the battlefield arena failed, the Botmaster refused to honor their decadent deal. Oh, and before I forget, DBZ had some wounded pride moments during the map and the interlude, but they were mainly just for laughs. Thankfully, he didn't count as a commander for the purposes of the side objectives. He'll get a Zenkai boost of sorts just in time for his next and final appearance, but we've still got a fair bit to go on this list. The final character I want to speak more about is Eric's character. His retirement as server admin was a major plot point in the story of the campaign, as well as the real-life story of our community. During the Chapter 4 interlude, he took the first step down from active duty. He wasn't officially retired yet, but he announced to my character and Mega's character that he would not be going on either mission to save our possessed friends. He admitted that his combat prowess diminished after becoming a dad, and he would be more efficient performing logistical duties from the rear. Someone had to serve as mission control for the two attack teams. Someone also had to lead the non-combatants of the server to safety. Eric could do both of these important things. He knew that he could not truly retire until the existential threat posed by Clyde was dealt with. During that same scene, it got me a bit in the feels to see our characters talk about getting older, because it was art imitating life. Aging comes for all of us, and raising a kid only sped up the process for Eric. Mega and I supported our friend's decision to retire in real life, just like our characters did in the campaign. In conclusion, this map was an all-star, and there wasn't much to nitpick here. It could have had an additional side objective for more challenge, because really, it felt like there was only one. There also could have been a bit more water and naval enemies to worry about. Finally, I felt that Naron should have been fightable on the map. I wanted him to be there as an extra threat for the player to worry about. In my hypothetical, defeating Naron wouldn't end the map, so the route condition would still need to be fulfilled. Again, I'm nitpicking. This map could be summed up in one word uttered by the many talented Smash Bros. Announcers we've had over the years. Success! Number 7. Chapter 2-3, Croak and Dagger. Frogs are love. Frogs are life. I could just end the write-up right there, but this map deserves better than that. On this adventure, Sneaky and Sturm found themselves deep inside a dank cave on a rescue mission for Namadou, leader of the true pacifists. My character originally expected Namadou's monastic order to test Sneaky and Sturm's character with a non-violent trial before giving them half of the tarot deck. But there was an unexpected complication. 3 of Namadou's monks were captured by Faster Supersonic's bandit gang. They were held hostage because FSS wanted the tarot cards for himself. Nam pleaded with our heroes to save the monks in exchange for what they sought, and that's how this battle began. Sneaky and Sturm started the map in the southern prison area where the monks were kept, along with several potential allies. Not all of the prisoners seemed trustworthy, but they were more than ready to fight the bandits, so that was good enough for me. The main objective of this map was to escort the 3 monks to the cave entrance, which was marked by flashing tiles. Now, I must take a moment to be grateful for the fact that we had full control over the monks. It's always a good day when you avoid the curse of green units. Too many strategy games across history forced the NPCs to be controlled by the AI during escort missions, including some of the greatest of all time. Nobody, and I mean nobody, likes to get a game over due to the AI making an incredibly stupid, suboptimal move. I give enormous credit to any strategy game designer who fixed or avoided this issue in their games. For example, the Mario plus Rabbids games had Escort Toad or Toadette missions, and you had full control over your escort unit there too. Anyway, let's get back to the monks themselves. They were coded as villager units, a rarely used unit type in the main campaigns of both Wargroove games. They were obviously meant to represent civilians with their lack of an attack function and minimal defense. This was fitting, as these monks were pacifists. Eric also gave the 3 of them a flavorful upgrade by equipping them with the Mage's Staff, which allowed them to heal, like mages. That way, the monks can help your troops help them. Just don't leave them exposed to the many siege weapons on this map. That's what I want to talk about next, and man, did Eric utilize them well here. Remember when I talked about how siege weapons were at their best when they held a defensive position that you were forced to cross? That's exactly what was going on here. The map was composed of narrow hallways, even narrower bridges, and lots of water. The siege weapons were strategically placed to cover every single angle of approach your ground units could possibly take. You also had minimal air units, and some of the siege units were ballistae, naturally. You couldn't easily rush them down with dogs or cavaliers either, because each siege weapon had several formidable troops guarding them. The only practical route left was the water, and this was the part where we got froggy. You see, one of the required prisoners you had to free was the King of Apples. If you've been following the development posts on our server, then you already knew how important this guy was to the campaign being as good as it was. My fellow King of Foodstuffs was a playtester for this campaign, along with Super Yoshi 141. Both playtesting and quality assurance are crucial processes that no game developer, big or small, should ever underrate. Moving on, when you freed the king, he summoned his Ambrosia Armada, a stylish group of frogs. The frog unit was another Wargroove 2 edition, and this map made them feel like the most fun unit in the game. Their movement was hardly restricted with the abundant water tiles, and their tongue pull ability opened up some absolutely majestic plays. They could drag those pesky siege weapons and anyone else to a watery grave. Defensively, they weren't stellar, but they could take one hit usually. They were safe from most melee attackers thanks to their movement and pull range, but ranged units were the ones you wanted to tread carefully around. A full health ballista did a base damage of 45, a full ranger did 60, and a full trebuchet took them out in one shot. That was, of course, before terrain bonuses were calculated. Most sea tiles gave one defense star/point, which allowed frogs to survive one trebuchet shot, as long as it wasn't a crit. This was important knowledge, because as long as a frog had a single point of HP, they could get value with their pulls. A pull at 1 HP was no different than a pull at 100 HP. Their regular attack wasn't even worth using in 90% of situations, so pull all day and be mindful of what kind of risks you can get away with. You could also pull allied units to get them one space closer to their target, or get them out of trouble. I can't stress enough how fun it was to get a pull chain going with my frog gang. One could call this map the ultimate frog showcase, because it shone a bright light on every little characteristic that made them useful. Now, in all fairness, you normally have to pay 600 gold to get a single one of these hoppers. That's the same price as a cavalier, so that ain't chump change. It needs to be said that any unit looks better when you get them for free. Still, frogs were hyper fun to play around with, and they were undeniably the MVPs on maps like this one. So how about the other units on this map? Sneaky and Sturm got a lot of great spots to place their groove with the close quarters and high unit density. You also had a number of named generics equipped with items, such as Cake Man 777, who was a spearman with leather armor. Cake Man the Spearman. That has a nice ring to it, and he deserves a special shout out for being cool and being a frequent viewer. Other community members that made cameos included Old School Nick, Burin Reftlar, Mars Rover 64, and Lumali? Hey, she's on our server. She was a character in the Super Mario Bros. Movie. The 41 Alliance plus Mega Squad 2 is officially the most ambitious crossover in all of fiction. Bring on Goku and Shrek for the third campaign! In all seriousness though, I don't mind cameo gags like this as long as they aren't spammed to the point of being cringeworthy. I also wanted to talk about the multiple route design here. There were 3 routes outside of the prison. The central route, going north to a hub area of sorts, the left route, that was closest to the exit, and the right route, which directly led to FSS's chambers. FSS himself won't fight you unless you bring the fight to him. There was a fun quote for beating him, but there was no practical value in doing so. Hey, at least there's more of a reason to go there than the northern route of the Siege of Obtusberg. The central route was definitely the best route for your first playthrough, as it wasn't too harshly guarded, and the frogs had several easy pull opportunities in that vicinity. The left route was certainly meant for second playthroughs and beyond, as it was no joke to get through. It was more tightly packed, and your frogs had to take more risks to get good pulls. The faster escape route was a sweet reward for overcoming it though. Now, it's time for a little gameplay nitpicking. The first side objective of the map involved destroying 10 siege weapons, which was perfectly fine. I liked that one, because it encouraged you to get big value plays with your frogs. The second side objective, on the other hand, was bland in practice. It was simply to free all the prisoners. Usually, I liked side objectives like that, but in this case, all of the prisoners were super close, since you started in the prison. It was literally way too easy to free them all, and I have an easy replacement. The second side objective could be defeating FSS. Boom! Now you finally had a reason to fight him other than getting the defeat quote. Another viable option would be keep X amount of prisoners alive. The magic number would need some playtesting, but I think that's always a solid basis for a side objective. It could even be keep all frogs alive if that works better. The dialogue on this map was generally enjoyable, but I will say that it wasn't a top performer in that regard. Sneaky and Sturm were always on point, but FSS and the prisoners weren't much more than decent reference droppers. FSS in particular was more or less a standard antagonist in the Kingdom Hearts games that came after the second one. I will never stop roasting the series for all the tomfoolery that happened between 2 and 3. Like I said, it was enjoyable, but not exceptional. This map was carried to the number 7 spot by its gameplay experience, first and foremost. There were plenty of close quarters indoor maps in the Wargroove franchise and Eric's custom campaigns, but this one was the only one with intense frog play. Bravo to Robotality for creating these units, and bravo to Eric for creating a wondrous playground for them. Number 6. Chapter 3-4. Cat and Mouse. In the animal kingdom, cats were agile and intelligent predators with keen senses. Mice were their most common choices of prey, and not even the cover of night was a guarantee of safety. The cat vampire reporter known as Q was considered one of the strongest predators on the server, but on this day, she would learn what it was like to be the prey. This was one of the strangest maps in the game to me, but it fascinated me like few others. You started off investigating the seemingly empty hall of emotes as Q, learning intriguing bits of lore about Mega and his emotes, much like an interlude map. It was cool to get this world building in the exact location where the first campaign began. The Siege of Obtuseburg was the return to the Ghost Gang's hometown, but this map was the return to the Ghost Gang's birthplace. One could say that this hall was the hospital or the lab. Mega was more or less the Dr. Light of this game, to reference my previous Mega Man X analogy. It was also neat how the map layout was an expanded version of the first map Eric ever made. The period of discovery and reminiscence would soon come to an end though, because the hunt was about to begin. Sakani, the ultimate opportunist, ambushed Q like a panther in the brush. He brought a whole pack of bots with him to hunt the journalist down as well. Unfortunately for them, Q came with armed guards herself. Sakani wouldn't have it any other way, as he wanted his prey to make him work for it. The main objective of this map was to get Q, and only Q, to the exit doors in the south. Sakani's troops would break down whatever doors they could find, and chase Q relentlessly. Believe me when I say that there was no way you were winning this fight. Sakani's numbers game was way beyond the capabilities of your pre-deployed squad. Q also had a very squishy team, with the following members: 1 Cavalier, 3 Swordsmen, 2 Spearmen, 2 Rangers, and 1 Mage. We really could have used more Cavs or a Giant here, but that's fine, because it was part of the challenge. Q herself was Sigrid, obviously, so she had access to the Vampiric Touch group, which was an instant kill plus lifesteal on any non-commander unit. Using that on an expensive unit like a Giant always felt awesome. The level 2 version gave her invincibility for our turn, which sounded awesome on paper, but in practice the AI would just ignore you. I found that out the hard way on stream. The enemy AI in this game was so dumb when it came to so many things, but handling invincibility wasn't one of them. You had to make the most of your attack ranges, your movement ranges, and the items that you found along the way to survive this harrowing chase. Children of the night were pouring out of every orifice, whittling you down with every room traversed. Eric had the right idea making horror movie references on this map, because Sakani was acting like a slasher villain. Oh, and before you think, what if I just take down Sakani? I'll stop you right there. Defeating Sakani earned you some special dialogue, but he just reappeared at the rear and his forces continued the hunt. Just focus on keeping everyone moving. Of course, you had some juicy side objectives to consider, as well as a slim spot. Side objective number 1 was to inspect all 5 points of interest inside the Hall of Emotes. 3 of them were easily found during the investigation section at the start of the map, but the real challenge was finding the remaining 2 once the battle began. One of them, the emote stasis chamber, was conveniently on your way to the exit. The other one, the charming little replica of the maze game, was completely out of your way. Any unit could use their action to inspect the points of interest, so you didn't need to send Q off on her own. I recommend using your Cavalier for this purpose, as they had the movement to reliably get to the maze game replica before the swarm swallowed them. Remember, Sakani's troops were just about everywhere on this map. Not only that, but there was a special sort of fog of war going on here. Eric unleashed his programming knowledge yet again to deliver a multifaceted, suspenseful experience. You see, the areas outside of the hall had standard fog of war mechanics, but inside the hall, each room was completely shrouded in fog until you opened one of the doors to said room. You could not use vision range to peek inside before opening the door, but once you opened it, you had full vision of everything inside. Eric said he used a linked list data structure to make this magic happen, and I couldn't help but be impressed by this level of thoroughness. This setup also played nicely into the ambushy nature of the map, because each room had enemies that sprang into action as soon as you opened the door. You had to be prepared before making an entrance. I kid you not when I say that this was the hardest map in the game for me. I'm sure everyone's answer to that question would be different. But for me, it was this infernal map. Those of you who watched me play on stream saw how I lost just before getting queued to the final room. I spread my forces too thin, I took a route that I didn't need to, and I lost everyone. The second attempt was victorious, but I failed to get all of the side objectives because one of them was lose fewer than 6 units. On a map like this, that was a serious challenge. It drove me crazy, but it was oh so satisfying to complete it when I played the map a third time off stream. In a later stream, I explained my ultimate strategy to the chat. It satisfied both side objectives and got the slim spot all in one go. I went from losing to barely winning to dominating over the course of my 3 playthroughs of this map. In general, I grew a lot as a Wargroove player during my stream playthrough, but I still don't consider myself anywhere near an expert. I haven't even tried my hand at competitive PvP yet. There could very well be several killers out there waiting to demolish me at tournaments. Right now, single-player campaigns like this one are enough to satiate my strategy game appetite, so don't expect me to show up in a bracket anytime soon. With that tangent out of the way, let's get back to the map. Sakani and Q's characters had several fun dialogue exchanges here. Q, as always, came in hot with the cat puns. Eric's search history was cursed once again. Sakani, like I said before, was a slasher villain reference machine. The funny part was, it really wasn't much of a deviation from his character in the previous campaign, or Sedge in the official campaigns. The creepy guy was built for only one purpose: hungering. There were also amusing cameos from the SMXLI emote squad. They were trapped inside the hall, and one of your units had to take a slight detour to break them free. Your prize for doing so was another Cavalier, another Mage, and a Rifleman. They weren't necessary for beating the map or fulfilling any of the side objectives, but they did reward the player's curiosity with fun dialogue and more troop presence. One of my only nitpicks for this map involved the right side rooms near the beginning. They had a Hunter's Dagger as a reward, but their distance away from the main objective and the ambush units that were there made them not worth exploring. My other nitpick was the Slim Spot reward for this map. You got 2 battle pups stationed way in the rear guard of Sakani's forces outside of the hall. They were completely useless to me. One might think they'd be a good distraction for the forces chasing you, but by the time you got to the Slim Spot, you and the enemy were already deep inside the hall. They weren't going to distract anyone relevant to the outcome of the map at that point. Normally, when Slim gave us a troll reward, there was a funny joke or a valid narrative reason for doing so, but we got neither of those this time around. We just got useless units, and that was a crying shame. Thankfully, the rest of this map was a bona fide banger. It humbled me when I first played it, and it inspired me to expand my skill set as a Wargroove player. I was always very good at establishing economic advantage via captures and generating favorable trades in combat, but this wasn't the map for that kind of play. I had to develop my ability to keep units alive for as long as possible while making constant, fluid movements towards the objective. This map was a masterclass on how to combine fog, deadly ambushes, and limited pre-deployed units to create a pulse-pounding escape map. Number 5. Paralog 2, Dungeon Crawler. Welcome to the dungeon of my haunted house, plum scum! Well, actually it wasn't my haunted house, but my character did know a lot about the place. On this map, Grey Ghost and the Pasta King went on an adventure deep into the archives of Admin Isle. It was a dangerous place filled to the brim with community history and all manner of weirdness. Grey Ghost was hoping to bring their close friend Bonji back by finding an archived copy of him here. If that could be done, then my character could theoretically use his Nitro Gem to perform an account recovery process, which would bring the copy data back to life. Are you confused yet? Good. It was all part of the fun of exploring this madcap world based on a Discord server. Coming to the archives was all Mega's idea, by the way, and he seemingly set out the expedition. Or did he? Before I answer that, let's talk about the gameplay. You had this ginormous dungeon to explore. It was like an interlude map on crack. You took control of Grey Ghost, and my character stood in a central location to provide hints and plenty of cheesy jokes. Eric went as far as writing 16 different hint dialogues for my character. The one you got depended on how far you've progressed on the map, so it was like a minigame to find them all. Why would you need hints in the first place, though? Well, let me tell you, this map was loaded with puzzles. We all know by now that Eric loves his puzzle maps, and I'm not the biggest fan of them, but this map hit differently. Each puzzle was a part of the dungeon that you had to traverse to access the battle portions of this map, so you ended up getting a big fat variety pack of experiences. You had to organize units in order, cross a teleport tile room, play around with doors, that sort of thing. Switching between puzzles and battles was a lot cooler to me than just doing puzzles for the entirety of the map. Furthermore, they were all elegantly weaved together to create a place that felt like an old-school D&D module. Also, one could say that there were some old-school Zelda vibes too, given the top-down perspective you moved around in. The side objectives were nicely done on this map, as one was related to the battle segments, and one was related to the exploration/puzzle segments. The battle objective was to lose no more than 3 units. That may sound incredibly difficult on paper, but it was doable as long as you weren't face tanking too much with your units. The exploration objective was to unlock the mystery of 7 secret books. This was my favorite side objective in the campaign, as it involved trivia questions! Each book asked you a different question about our community, and that was obviously right up my alley. If you weren't a member of our community, don't fret. You could try again by ending the turn. But be warned that it advanced your turn counter by 1, which might lead to you missing out on the S rank if you were interested in going for that. Otherwise, the turn counter would not move until you were in one of the battle segments. You had 18 turns total to get the S rank, which might have seemed generous, but it was actually not one of the easier goals to meet. You also had to account for the 2+ turns needed for the special scripted gameplay segment at the end. One more thing I wanted to say about the trivia questions was that it was possible to answer them based on references made in both campaigns, so do keep that in mind. They're also not the hardest trivia questions in the world, so don't sweat it, I believe in you. Now, let's talk about the battles themselves. The first one was against an archived copy of Power to Mario from 2007. The timely references Eric wrote in his lines had me laughing without fail. He mentioned the iPhone in one of his lines, and I was immediately reminded of the comparatively cheap Motorola flip phone I had back then. I didn't get an iPhone or Android smartphone until 2017. My old ass was behind the times on phone tech for a long time. Now, here's a plot question. How did this archived copy gain sentience? I thought we needed a nitro gem to bring them to life. Otherwise, wouldn't Banji be roaming these halls too? Perhaps PTM and the other enemy commanders of this map reacted to the power of my character's nitro gem as soon as we set foot in the archives. Or maybe because, their undead selves are around somewhere, maybe on the Destiny Isles, maybe their archived copies react to that. Or maybe residual energy from Slim using his nitro gem on Admin Isle seeped into the archive somehow, because he was using it a lot during the first campaign. Eric, you're welcome to answer this question in the comments. Maybe you wanted to keep this intentionally open-ended, and that's fine by me. Anyway, PTM threw a comedic trivia challenge at you at first, but regardless of the outcome, you had to fight him. By the way, I'm not going to list all of the references to community members or projects, because there were a ton of them, and you already saw my reactions to them on stream. Instead, I'll tell you that the fight against PTM was a reference to the tank ops mission from the original Advance Wars. It was a simple, straightforward brawl. But if you were seeking the S rank, you had to make every turn count. The second battle segment was against an archived copy of K-Man from 2013. Damn, that was an awesome year, for so many reasons. I got to see Eric, PTM, K-Man, and many other friends in person for the first time at PAX East 2013. Also, a lot of games I liked came out that year, like Fire Emblem Awakening, Metal Gear Rising, and Shin Megami Tensei 4. As soon as I got there during my stream, I knew with 200% certainty who the third opponent was going to be. K-Man also hit me with a funny rigged question, and then the battle began. This one was like tanks from Advance Wars 2, except with cavaliers and siege weapons. It was fun to just sit back and shoot things, but I was on the clock, like I said before. The third battle segment was against none other than an archived copy of Gaia Crusher 9 from 2018. That year was much closer to the present, yet it still felt like over a decade ago. Admittedly, I only played 2 games from that year. Mario Tennis Aces and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, of course. 2018 was also 1 year before the release of the original Wargroove, and Eric's first campaign happened not long after that. Eric played into that with the dialogue between Grey Ghost and Gaia. The Catsun copy revealed that she heard about Slim wanting to invade another Discord server, dethrone one of his longtime rivals, and eradicate the Maze game remastered from existence. This copy was definitely made not long before the events of the first campaign. Another important bit of dialogue was Grey Ghost saying Gaia reminded them of Banji with their enthusiasm, who was also using Nuru as an avatar. So yeah, Eric made nice nods to real-life events and the plots of both campaigns here. As for Gaia's battle, it was a clear reference to Sea Fortress from Advance Wars 2. Just look at all those flyers. During my stream, I got careless and Gaia crushed me, but on my second attempt, I crushed Gaia. It was also funny that the two commanders were only good for using grooves and attacking each other. The flyers on both sides had to do most of the work here. This was also the make or break battle for the lose fewer than 3 unit side objective. Aeronauts and dragons were woefully vulnerable to witches. Even witches feared other witches. You had to respect the rules of air combat by positioning defensively and baiting the opponent. I mean it when I say that this battle felt fantastic to master. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Slim Spot. It gave no reward this time around, which made sense given the highly specific unit balance Eric wanted for each mini-battle. The developer commentary was great as always, but there was an interesting little promise at the end of it. The characters reached an agreement to make the next map's Slim Spot reward extra special, and that map was the final map. This dialogue got me excited to see what surprise the final Slim Spot was going to unravel. On my street playthrough, I diligently got every slip spot up to and including this point, so I wasn't going to miss the grand reward if there was one, like I did in the first playthrough of the first campaign. With that out of the way, the final segment of the map opened up after clearing all of the battle and puzzle rooms. It ended up being a battle of sorts. Grey Ghost successfully found an archived copy of Bonji in a dormant state, and my character was called over to perform the account recovery process. Before we could do that, though, the CSS Commander Trio returned to punish the visitors for trying to take data out of the archives. They also brought 6 giants with them. My character and Grey Ghost were trapped in a seemingly hopeless battle out of nowhere. How the hell did they come back fully healed anyway? Eric used the Ghost Don't Die line from Super Mario 64 as an explanation, but that made no damn sense, since it was already established that they were archived copies of user data from a specific time period. My conclusion was, they had home field regenerative advantage, and the ghost line was just for laughs. This wasn't a major flaw of your writing, Eric, but I'm going to give you a bit of flack for using the exact same trope you mocked in Chapter 5X of the first campaign. Grey Ghost conquered every battle on this map, only to be magically trapped in a losing situation in a cutscene? Come on, man, you could do better than that. On top of that, why didn't my character just teleport himself, Grey Ghost, and Bonji out of there? He already proved he could teleport himself and multiple characters at once in both campaigns, so there wasn't much of an excuse here. Except maybe magic. It was crystal clear that you wrote in a bunch of contrivances to set up one big set-piece moment, and I get that. That moment came while my character and Grey Ghost were pushed into a corner. My character revealed that he would not be able to break through the giant horde, even if he used the Nitro Gem's power. And Grey Ghost was like, "Give it to me." Naturally, my character refused at first, knowing the risks of letting someone as emotionally unstable as Grey Ghost access the power of Nitro. The situation was too dire at this point to play it safe, though. Grey Ghost made a logical case for themselves, and they even evoked some emotion when they lamented the fact that the server's denizens didn't trust them as much as they trusted Blue Ghost. My character ended up making the judgment call of handing over the gem. That was an intense moment in the storyline, because the ramifications were gigantic. Did my character just create the true final boss of the campaign with his decision? He did say earlier in the map that coming down to the archives alone with Grey Ghost might have been one of his rare lapses in judgment. He might have just doomed the server to annihilation. What played out next was a bone-crunching curb stomp battle as the now nitro-powered Grey Ghost steamrolled their way to a flawless victory. Seriously, none of the enemies could even hurt them, and Grey Ghost one-shotted them on counterattack. Remember when I said that Grey Ghost probably had the highest base power level of anyone on the server? Remember their feats in the Siege of Obtusberg? Now, imagine those feats multiplied several times over. No one on the server would be able to best Nitro Grey Ghost in a fight. This was almost like giving Thanos all of the Infinity Stones, or seeing Zero go Maverick. This segment gave us a taste of Grey Ghost at their absolute strongest, and I was hyped. I was hyped to witness it. When the enemies were finally gone, my character tried to calm down the adrenaline and nitro-pumped Grey Ghost, but the emote Juggernaut's rage could not be controlled. Fortunately for me, Mega arrived at the last second via a secret entrance. Grey Ghost was pissed off at Mega that there was a shortcut this whole time, and then they turned their murderous gaze towards him. Fortunately for him, that distraction was just the opportunity my character needed to disarm Grey Ghost of the Nitro Gem with one precise strike. The Dark Avenger then went back to normal, and the server was spared from yet another calamity, thanks to the teamwork of Mega and my character. After that dramatic roller coaster, my character successfully performed the account recovery process, and Grey Ghost took a much needed rest. Only Mega, my character, and Grey Ghost would know the full truth about what happened that day in the archives. At least for now. If everyone else on the server knew about Grey Ghost's Nitro Rampage, then there would be much panic and suspicion, especially during a stressful time like the war against Clyde. If I was writing the story for a third campaign, then I would most definitely incorporate both the secret and the threat of Grey Ghost going Nitro into it. It wouldn't have to be the core of the plot, but you could do so many fun things with it. The only thing I want to nitpick about this map, besides the story-related nitpick from earlier, is the traversal. Is the traversal time. The dungeon was gargantuan, and backtracking through it to search for secrets was sluggish. My recommendation would be to add warp gates between already completed parts of the map, and somewhere near the starting point. That would make the gameplay flow so much smoother. Other than that, this map was positively brilliant. On my replay, the puzzles were obviously easily dealt with, but the battles were fun for me to find optimal paths through. It didn't suffer from the same decay as Chapter 2-4 thanks to that. Variety is the spice of life, and this map embodied that classic mantra. It had puzzles, it had battles, it had exploration, it had lore, it had a dramatic dilemma, it had funny references, it had touching references, and it had me! Really though, Grey Ghost was the star of the show here. They were like Duke Nukem from the Wholesome Duke memes at times, but they were also like Cold Steel the Hedgehog at times too. Their personality was a decadently enjoyable mix, and they did not disappoint in their leading role. This dungeon managed to crawl its way into my stupendous top 5. Number 4, Chapter 2-2, Desert Defenders. I would start this write-up with a certain Star Wars quote, but Sneaky and Sturm already did that in the opening cutscene, so I'll spare you a repeat. In this map, the plucky treasure hunters found themselves in the Sandopolis zone, where the legendary user known as the Collector resided. After briefly being mistaken for hostile bandits, Sneaky and Sturm managed to earn an audience with the Collector, who turned out to be Gentleman Lucas. Lucas was only an NPC villager in the first campaign, but Eric promoted him to Wolfar in this campaign. Wolfar was well known for playing golf with enemy units, as well as his own. And that's exactly how Gentleman Lucas dealt with intruders. He kept a massive treasure hoard within the ruins he was using as his home base, which naturally drew attention from all sorts of rogues. There were rings, emblems, stars, medals, ink weapons, super emeralds, the Master Emerald, fish statues, bug statues, and so much more. This man was a legend around the server for amassing so many collectibles and achievements across gaming history. Eric didn't just write a pure fantasy here, because Lucas in real life is a dedicated, shiny Pokemon hunter and an expert on completing archipelago runs. The Collector was basically Lucas styled up to 11, much like the rest of our characters in the campaign. I was happy to see my friend get such an upgraded role. To get back to the premise of the map, Sneaky and Sturm earnestly made their case to Lucas, saying that they were only here for the Sacred Relic, aka one half of the deck of tarot cards. Sneaky, being the sneaky one that she was, had some comical thoughts about taking other treasures from Lucas's hoard with her, but Sturm managed to make a successful persuasion check to earn Lucas's trust. This was yet another reminder that these two worked great together and balanced each other out. Our heroes passed the trial laid out by my character, and Lucas was about to hand over the tarot cards, but then, cue the bandit attack! The rough-riding rogues, who Sneaky and Sturm talked to at the Salty Splatoon in Chapter 2-1, had surrounded the ruins. Apparently, They got curious about the duo's relic search, so they followed them all the way here. These ruffians were led by the deadly trio of Joypad Jake, Salem, and Skillet Fan for Life. I do want to note here that Salem was now Leah, and her transition happened a few months after this campaign's release, so that's why the name was what it was here. Neither Eric nor I intended to engage in any dead naming. Leia is a very cool member of our community. She loves card games, reading, and she makes great game recommendations. Eric definitely referenced the card gaming in the write-up for her character, as well as the fact she spoke French. Her unit was Lieutenant Umibozu, an amphibian mini-commander like Captain Sourcheeks, but with a different sprite. Jake is also a very cool community member who I've done multiple Fire Emblem challenge runs with on Discord voice calls. The last game we did a run of was Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, aka FE6. In case you're confused, the way it worked out was he'd be doing an Iron Man run of FE6 on his screen, and I'd be doing an Iron Man run of FE6 on my screen. It was always fun to see how differently our runs turned out. Leia often joined us on these calls, along with Eric, Darth, Lucas, and Slim. They were always a good time, and will more than likely do more in the future. Jake's unit was Bull Rush, a Cavalier mini-commander who fought the Fari in the game's official story mode. I think I don't need to say why that unit was a perfect fit for Jake. As for Skillet, I haven't had many interactions with her, but she always seemed nice. I do know that she's a die-hard fan of the Baltimore Ravens, and Eric most certainly referenced that by making her the Oracle, who was a witch mini-commander from the pirate chapters of story mode. She had several aeronauts with her as well, aka her beloved Ravens. With these three commanders and their varied troops standing together, Lucas's collection was in serious danger. The trio even called themselves Jade Star Studio, which was an obvious reference to you-know-who. Sneaky, Sturm, and Lucas had to join forces to survive this incursion, so this was a defend map, right? Wrong! This was actually a thrilling hybrid of a route and a defend map. You had the task of taking out every enemy unit, while not letting a single one set foot inside the glowing zone at the center of Lucas's base. An additional layer of challenge was added to these objectives by the sandstorms that produced Fog of War. Eric was merciful though, and gave the player breaks from the sandstorms, as well as storm warnings via the dialogue. These warning dialogues went all the way up to turn 20, and Eric wrote a lot of charming banter between the three heroes. You were encouraged to take mental notes of where all the enemies were before you lost vision for a while. To mount a successful defense, you had to make intelligent use of the golfing groove, aka tee-off. To that end, Lucas spawned several 1 HP swordsmen at the start of the map, which were perfect golf balls for the big man. Eric was also generous in letting Lucas automatically recharge his groove after using it. Just keep in mind that you can't launch units onto tiles shrouded by the Fog of War. I was fixated on making all of the drives I could, so I couldn't afford to neglect the vision game during the sandstorm turns. That leads me to my next point, unit building. You started the map with a whopping 5,500 gold, which was unusual for this campaign and even the official story mode. It was hella exciting to have all of that money in my hands. But this was counteracted by having only 100 income per turn. There were also no properties to capture on the map. Yet, you literally could not capture a single extra property. You started with one, and that's all you got. You started with 2 barracks and 1 air tower, and they don't produce income in Wargroove. You had to be judicious with your unique financial situation. One of the side objectives was to beat the map without building a giant. So if you were going for that, like I was, you had to fight the temptation to build a swarm of them. You also couldn't build siege weapons, because they were unable to be placed on castle or fort tiles. Building a dragon could be a good idea, but you had to maneuver them around the fort before they could properly roast some foes. Also, you had to keep a sharp lookout for enemy mages, as they could easily ambush your dragon while the sandstorm was up. Remember the old adage I learned in the first campaign: balance is key. Don't neglect the doggos and spearmen on a map like this. You also had some items near the flashing zone to equip. That hero sword was perfect for the rifleman you started out with. Eric was so thoughtful and precise with every little obstacle and tool here. There was never a dull turn as I was constantly reevaluating the situation and patching all the entrances to the base. The enemy came at you aggressively, which I loved. Honestly, this map was one little tweak away from perfect. Everything hit just right. And my only itty-bitty nitpick was the other side objective. It was to use the tee-off groove 5 times, and I was like, that's it? That number was way too easy to fulfill, but the objective itself was good. Golfing units was a hyper-addicting part of the map, so we needed a number that required a bit of effort to reach. That aside, this map was a sans classic. Number 3, Chapter 4-4, Judgment Day. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire! This map was by far the hardest map for me to rank. It was the final map of the campaign, and everyone who watched my stream already knew my first impressions of it. I loved 95% of it, but then the last 5% of it was a disappointment. How do you put a rank on that? Was it better to start rough but end with a bang than the other way around? I had a lot of thoughts and emotions to sort through after I beat it on stream. I also knew that my opinion might change after playing it again. Once that happened, it did indeed change. I considered this map to be so close to Wargroove Nirvana. But there was that little asterisk at the end. You know what I mean? Don't worry if you don't, because I'm going to explain. As the map began, almost all of the heroes from the previous maps assembled like the Avengers to put an end to Clyde's endgame. Blue Ghost, Grey Ghost, Sneaky, Stern, Mega, Darth, Naron, Super Yoshi, Rare, Cobalt, Eshmael, Salus, Pond, and my character formed the starting squad for this showdown of mythic proportions. That's more commanders than any other map in the game, and that number is only going to grow as you progress through the map. From turns 2 through 7, Chancellor Blarg, Mr. L, Venta Blanc, Werehog, Lucas, Rune Tempest, Faster Supersonic, the King of Apples, Zany, and Summer also joined the fray in fitting pairings with fitting generic allies. To make matters better, Eric and even Sakani joined up on turn 8. Eric had secured the rest of the server, so he could now contribute to our final fight. As for Sakani, he saw the writing on the wall, and as always, he wanted to be part of the winning team. Last, but most certainly not least, we had the indomitable Slim Kirby join us for getting the final Slim spot. Everyone is here! Or close enough to it. Hey, we really can't complain here. Eric gave us the greatest gaming roster ever. Smash Ultimate and Fortnite's rosters were bunches of nobodies compared to our server. Okay, I'm hyped because I'm too much. But our community is cool, and I'm glad I'm a part of it. Clyde and his soulless bots lacked the power of bonds that we had, and that would be his downfall. The main objective of this map was to destroy the 9 power nodes that were providing energy to a protective firewall that was covering Clyde on his private island. Each power node was represented by a stronghold, so you had to destroy all 9 strongholds to reach the Lord of the Bots. There were 2 problems though. First, each power node was guarded by a truckload of bots, some of them even being very high value units like giants. Second, the map was divided into several pieces by the crevices that formed as a result of the server gradually crumbling to dust. These crevices were conveniently represented by the Abyss terrain type, so that was a good choice on Eric's part to really bring home the dark thematic of a world on the verge of ruin. These little things are ones we often take for granted in our games. With those problems in mind, our starting group would have to handle the 3 power nodes in their vicinity, while the reinforcement groups would have to handle the power nodes on their pieces of the pie. For example, where Hog and Vanta had one, Mr. L and the Chancellor had one, you get the idea. Everyone had to do their part, and you didn't have to worry about getting a game over if any of these characters fell in battle, except for Blue Ghost. The hero of the first campaign needed to stay up, but if you were going for the side objectives, then every named character had to survive the battle. You already know how much I appreciate challenges like that. The other side objective was to defeat the AI Slim Kirby, who was hilarious to witness. Ha! I'm willing to bet the entire rural acreage on our victory. With that being said, Mega, you had every right to be enraged at that AI slop. Also, it would have been beyond cool if the real Slim Kirby had a line for landing the final hit on his deepfake. Alas, we didn't get that, but we had boatloads of terrific dialogue and death quotes on this map. It's never easy to deal with an ensemble cast, but I believe that Eric wrote enough moments for everyone to shine. Not all of us were on good terms, but we were all united by our desire to rid our home of the bot plague. It also needs to be said that I really liked how you could cross bridges to the other pieces of the map. It was beautiful symbolism for the power of bonds I spoke about earlier. Individually, we were strong, but together, we were far greater than the sum of our parts. If one side was struggling with their power node, then their friends could come over and support them, because that's what we do for our friends in real life. To hammer that point further, a lot of the grooves in the game were capable of monumental feats when combined with others. For example, you could combine the defense boost of Mega's shards with the defense buff of my character's Hierophant Tarot to go beyond the maximum terrain defense bonus. Another example would be trapping a bunch of units with Cobalt's vines so that they couldn't escape Sneaky and Sturm's flames. The list goes on, and if you ever needed a pick-me-up, then you could drink the free Starglass brew you got when Vanta's group arrived. Once our team efforts took down every power node, Clyde became exposed and surrounded. Now you might be thinking, it can't end that easily. He's got a nasty final surprise waiting for our heroes, right? Maybe he was going to power up into a freaky final boss form. Well, nothing like that happened. Clyde was just all by himself, a normal Guardian unit with slightly enhanced defense and a heavy limb blocking. That's a strong unit, but ultimately he was just a regular foe. Even a giant would get demolished by over 20 commanders coming at them at once. Remember my rant about Wargroove bosses during the Siege of Obtusperk write-up? Clyde was a perfect example of the kind of boss that wasn't fun to beat. And to be fair, most Wargroove bosses were like this. Clyde was worse off than a commander boss though, because he was vulnerable to the full effects of grooves. During my stream, I assumed that Eric had coded some special immunities for him. I sent Q over to Clyde, thinking I'd soften him up with Vampiric Touch. I was like, surely this won't one-shot him. As it turned out, she one-shotted him! Q's journalist kitten interns were going to have a field day with this one. They probably typed, "Breaking news! Local cat girl destroys Discord's mascot." Now, I was 300% positive that Q was the strongest fighter in the server, not Grey Ghost. I was laughing at first, but then a wave of disappointment washed over me. That epic struggle I went through to destroy the power nodes rewarded me with a boss fight that was over in mere seconds. When Eric saw what happened, he was shocked that Vampiric Touch worked on Guardians. Guardians were a seldomly used unit type in the official story mode, and Sigrid wasn't playable in said story mode. It was fair that Eric had no idea about this interaction. It also made sense how this wasn't caught by the playtesters, since you had over 20 commanders to kill Clyde with. had discovered a rare interaction. One could even call it an exploit. In that sense, it was funny as hell, but I was still hoping for a more satisfying final encounter. During my second playthrough, I fought Clyde without one-shotting him, and he was still super easy due to the fact that I had so many freaking commanders. How do we make this confrontation more interesting? One suggestion I heard from Unemployed Giraffe was to make Nitro Grey Ghost the true final boss of the map. It was an idea I could get behind, because Eric teased the hell out of it in Paralog 2. It would require some good setup writing to make it feel right though. You'd also have the typical 20 versus 1 issue I already mentioned. Personally, the approach I'd take would be to expand on the AI Slim concept. What if Clyde had a small army of AI elites guarding him on his island? AI Slim would be moved over to that island, and he'd be joined by AI Mega, AI Eric, AI PK, AI anybody really. The possibilities for humor and drama were endless. Many strategy RPGs have done a similar concept before, often to great effect. Eric would be paying homage to those games if he did that. He also wouldn't have to change the flow of the map or his story. He'd just have to write some lines for the new AI clones. This idea is a great fit, because Clyde's greatest feats in the story were gathering information at breakneck speed, organizing tremendous armies, and empowering his subordinates to do his dirty work. He wasn't one of those badass anime or video game generals who led from the front. He was an efficient supercomputer who delegated tasks and minimized risks. Eric did a good job of presenting those characteristics about him throughout the campaign, and I think my AI Elites idea would be exactly the kind of final gambit he'd run. If you did that, Eric, then the map would end with a bang felt across the galaxy, and it would more than likely take my #1 spot. As it stood, it was still a highly memorable grand finale. Everything leading up to the Clyde fight was peak Wargroove, and one could argue that the nodes themselves were the actual final bosses of the game. I don't agree with that argument, but I respect it. I also can't forget to talk about Clyde's death cutscene. Every named character delivered one last quote before contributing their energy to Blue Ghost's final attack. The quotes ranged from serious to silly, long to short, but they were all submitted by us. I believe Eric had to fill in a few himself, but I could tell that a lot of the quotes were written by my friends. I smiled, I laughed, and I cheered for our impending triumph. Blue Ghost then swung their blade with all of our combined might, vanquishing Clyde along with all of his unwanted bots. The server was saved, and Eric could finally retire in peace. Mega would become the sole admin of the server, and Eric could spend more time with his family. Now would be a good time to talk about Eric's real-life retirement, which happened on June 6th of this year, roughly 4 months after this campaign was released. Eric hosted one final trivia event in the Discord with a bunch of us in a voice call together before he officially transferred ownership of the server to Mega. It was a fun and emotional night that marked the end of an era. Eric still stuck around in the community, of course, but as a regular member. Mega and the rest of the moderation team, of which I'm a part of, honored him by giving him the founder role, and he kept his distinct name color. A few months later, we changed the name of the server to the Blue Ghost Tavern. We did this because, first of all, it honored both Eric and Mega. Since they worked on the Maze game remastered together. Secondly, it honored the character of Blue Ghost, who was a cute and simple design with a lot of history in our community. Thirdly, the tavern part of our name represented our server's atmosphere as a lively place filled with people who love talking about video games, sports, and good eats. Speaking of good eats, players who beat every map of the campaign were rewarded with the epilogue, a heartwarming interlude map where Eric makes pizza and chats with the rest of the cast, as well as a few surprise guests. I don't factor the interludes into the rankings but that one was the best, and it was the perfect way to say goodbye to these characters. To get back to ranking this map right here, I must say that it wrapped up the war against Clyde admirably, and I considered it much better than the final map from the first campaign. This was a prime example of a map that had bigger flaws than some of the maps that were ranked below it, but also much greater strengths. I judge the Judgment Day to be in comfy third place. Number 2, Chapter 3-6, Reagent Run. Here was a map that impressed me way more than I was expecting. I thought it was going to be an esoteric puzzle map with barely any battling, but boy was I wrong. It was set in the swamps of Blighttown, and I wasn't shocked in the slightest to see a Dark Souls reference here. Not too long before Eric released this campaign, I beat the first Dark Souls for the first time, and Eric got excited seeing me write about my experience on Discord. That dude loves his Souls games and Souls-likes, let me tell you. I appreciated his appreciation because it's nice to write for an appreciative audience. With that tangent aside, the premise of this map was that Salus needed special healing potions for his dragons from medicine maker Mr. Mario, who now goes by the name Venta Blanc. Venta needed to go to the swamps to gather special tree sap, but the swamps were the territory of the dreaded Werehog. The lycanthropic chieftain was infamous for spreading video game hoaxes across the server. "Don't listen to Werehog's lies," people would often say. Venta took the diplomatic approach with Werehog at first, but the negotiations broke down when she offered him Swedish meatballs. You see, Venta didn't know that Werehog was a Muslim, and Muslims were expressly forbidden from eating pork. It was halal! There was no going back after that, and the fight for the tree sap began in earnest. That was perhaps one of the funniest cutscenes in the campaign, in my book. It was like one of those scenes from a sitcom where a conversation that started out as pleasant eventually spiraled out of control due to a misunderstanding. Moving forward, your main objective was to gather at least 7 sap samples and deposit them in the collection basin near your starting point. Once you had enough, you had to command your lookout villager unit to pull the lever and end the map. The sap samples were coded as objects that only your rogue units could collect and deposit, as they were Venta's specially trained sap handlers in the narrative of the map. You started off with 3 rogues, and keeping them alive was one of the side objectives, but if that objective didn't matter to you, then you could always buy more rogues at the nearby hideout. The other side objective was finishing the map with exactly 7 sap samples. You might be wondering why this was a thing, and that's because of the way the sap scoring worked. There were lesser tree saps that were worth 1 sap, and there were greater tree saps worth 3 saps. It was quite easy to end up with over 7 given the chaos of the battlefield. You needed a tight, well-executed plan to meet the exact quota and keep all your rogues alive. There were multiple ways to get it done, and I appreciated how much experimentation this map encouraged. Transports got a huge spotlight for their ability to expedite the trips of the rogues, as well as shielding them from deadly blows. Air troopers had plenty of rivers, forests, and mountains to jump over. They were also great for capturing buildings to fortify your supply chain security. Units like rangers, cavaliers, amphibians, and mages were needed to slap down the most dangerous marauders targeting your rogues. I don't recommend building siege weapons here, as your forces have to constantly be on the move. The slip spot here gave one of the biggest booms in slip spot history, a barge! It also started on a river, a little ahead of your starting location. Finally, we got a good location! One of my biggest pet peeves regarding Slim and PK spots was that the bonus units often started too far away from the action to make a difference. The Slim spots were especially guilty of this. You've heard this before if you watched my videos and streams. It felt so good to get a good unit in a good spot here. and I used the hell out of that barge. This map required you to make clever use of all of your resources and the game's fundamentals. Werehog was a doggo mini-commander with the Captain Saber, who was debuffed during the day and buffed during the night. All of Werehog's troops followed this same rule. How on earth did Eric program a day-night cycle for Wargroove's unit statistics? Eric was a talented dude for using Wargroove 2's nighttime and daytime visual effects in this way. The coding behind the collection basin was crazily crafty too. This programming stuff was always fascinating to me, but I'd have to take some college courses or a coding boot camp to fully understand the depths of what Eric accomplished here. To add to the day-night madness, there were 2 special towers on the map that offered interesting deals to the player when the player used the interact option on them. The first tower was the Sun Temple, which was tended to by Kingo Blight. For the price of 800 gold, he would use his magic to change the map from night to day. That's a steep bill, but it might be worth it to turn the tides of battle in your favor. The second tower was the Moon Citadel, which was tended to by Shadow M. Wape. Man, yeah, that's a strange name. Are you sure that's not a typo error? Anyway, he could do some hocus pocus to change the map from day to night, and he would pay you 400 gold for accepting his disadvantageous terms. I love devious trade offers like this. Roguelikes and roguelites do this kind of thing all the time. These towers were satisfying new tools for the player to flex their strategic decision making. Also, all of this day and night stuff was clearly a reference to Ogre Battle, especially the towers, which were shoutouts to the Sun and Moon tarot cards. That doesn't earn the map extra points in my ranking, but I always appreciate a well-done Ogre Battle reference. I wish there were more trade offer mechanics in Wargroove maps. Really, I do. The Ice Climber map had cool trade-offs too, but it didn't have the day and night play. That really adds a cool extra wrinkle to it. Remember, the day and night cycle had 4 stages. You could easily tell what they were by the lighting effects, and there were proper times for both towers. The trick was to have cheap units like swordsmen or dogs near the towers whenever you wanted to trigger them. Don't use your commander or other key units. This map wasn't anywhere near a cakewalk with all these variables to consider. But that was just the way I liked it. By the way, if you defeated Werehog on this map, he respawned back in his starting position and came at you again. It was usually worth doing, as he wouldn't be able to harass your units for a while, especially your frail rogues. It's worth noting that dogs deal a base damage of 90 to rogues and 135 on a crit. Oh, did I mention how much I liked the Rainforest tile set yet? It was so pretty to look at in both the map view and cutscene view. Everything about this map just worked. There were only 2 maps in the game that I call a hair's length from perfect, and this was one of them. I wouldn't change a thing about it. I'm sure we could find some microscopic ways to improve it even further if we looked hard enough, but that time would be better spent on future projects. Eric and I have had conversations about this before. Eventually, a creator has to stop refining their work and release it out into the world to get feedback. If they kept it in development for forever, then they would never get that. Eric reached that sweet spot with this map, without question. It had just about everything you could ever want in a map. The film challenge? Check. Good writing? Check. Creative gameplay? Check. You even had the extreme unofficial completionist challenge of fighting all of the tree sap dialogues. There were 28 tree saps total, and there were victory or defeat dialogues for many different sap counts you could potentially finish the map with. Here, I'll list them. This info comes straight from the Slim Spot dialogue. Exactly 0, 1 to 3, 4 to 5, exactly 6, exactly 7, exactly 8, 9 to 10, 11 to 13, 14 to 27, and all 28. I'm sure you've heard this many times already, Eric, but that's a lot of writing. You didn't have to go that hard in the paint, but you did, and it was one of the reasons why this map was exceptional. So, all that I just said, how do you outplace the virtually perfect map? Let's just say it was the closest of close races on this list, and there were a bunch of close races. This map almost ran away with the gold, but the number one map used a slightly purer reagent in its chemical reaction. Number 1, Chapter 2-1, The Heist. Once upon a time, there was a man who died. His name was Bonji, and his spirit shone brightly with positivity. But during one fateful day on Admin Isle, his light was snuffed out by the power of Nitro. Two wannabe crooks named Sneaky and Stern witnessed this brutality, and from that moment on, they knew they had to pursue the secrets of the power that was on display. It all started as a quest for wealth and glory for them, but they were about to discover that they were more than capable of following the way of kings. This map was the beginning of what was arguably the greatest story arc in the campaign, the Sneaky and Stern arc. In the gritty tavern known as the Salty Splatoon, the two seekers asked the local riffraff about Slim Kirby's sword in a series of chuckle-worthy cutscenes. Both Sneaky and Stern got blown off by multiple ruffians who would be their future foes, see Chapter 2-2. But for now, they kept their distance. This haphazard questioning session caught the attention of a mysterious ranger in golden garb who approached the youngsters. We've already gone through the other Chapter 2 maps, so there's no need for mystery here, besides doing it for the sake of style. The mysterious ranger was my character in disguise, and he acted to prevent the mischievous pair from talking too much about dangerous treasure in a tavern full of roughnecks. My character offered Sneaky and Stern the information they sought for the fabulous price of 41,000 gold. Obviously, the broke buddies didn't have that kind of money, so they had to do some kind of roguish job to raise some funds. The artist, known as Ringra15, took the opportunity at this point to enter the scene and ask the duo for help with the stolen painting. In hindsight, did my character prearrange this meeting? It was already a fact that he set things up with Lucas and Namadou beforehand, but did he do the same with Ringra? I'm leaning towards no, because my character most likely didn't even know who Sneaky and Stern were before they made a scene at the tavern. It was possible that he did, but we have no evidence in the dialogue to support that. We do know that Ringra formed a work partnership with my character in the epilogue. It's possible that they knew each other before Chapter 2, but it's also possible that they only met after the events of this map. Eric, you're welcome to answer this question if you like. Either way, Sneaky and Stern now had their ticket to making 41,000 gold. All they had to do was steal Ringra's painting back from Rune Tempest and his gang of brigands. Unfortunately for our prospective heist planners, Rune's fortress was fortified with a crystal-powered security door system, as well as dozens of armed thugs. This map's main objective was straightforward. Obtain the painting from the middle, and I repeat, the middle chest. It was no small journey to get there, though. There were a lot of things to deal with before that point. The first of them was the fact that Rune's battalion was charging towards your stronghold, which was a game over condition. It might sound odd for me to mention such a fundamental part of the game, but it makes sense when you look at the campaign as a whole. People who watched or played this campaign in full would have noticed that not a lot of maps had strongholds to defend. It was certainly more common in official Wargroove missions as well as Advance Wars missions. The fact that there was a stronghold to defend on this map gave it a layer of uniqueness from the get-go. Sneaky and Stern had several pre-deployed troops at the ready, and they could certainly build more. but they were still grossly outnumbered. The difficulty level was a jump up from the Chapter 1 missions, and it was the right time for the campaign to make such a jump. The player had to use what they learned in the earlier maps to overcome the odds and get our heroes to the painting. There were numerous ways to go about it too. The easiest route, and the one first suggested in the dialogue, was to put Sneaky and Sturm on a barge to sneak into the fortress from the south while their troops took advantage. Of bridge choke points. Did I say checkpoints? I meant bridge choke points to stall the assault team. It was logical and safe, but it still required sharp defensive tactics. Siege weapons, spearmen, rangers, riflemen, and giants were indubitably the right place here. You also had to use a rifleman in the north to shoot the security crystal multiple times. Each shot opened one set of doors, but closed the others. That would eventually get Sneaky and Sturm into the treasure room. The harder route was to abandon the barge altogether and take Rude's forces head on. Sneaky and Sturm will prompt the player with a decision before this route officially occurs. Eric had a good reason for this, because once the player committed to the aggressive approach, a special dialogue played where Rune turned off his security system and ordered all of his troops to attack. In addition to that, Rune magically deployed barracks and ports so that he could build more units. During my second playthrough, I chose this route, and it was a hellacious good time. It was a great test of the player's economic and offensive skills. Your reward for taking this harder path was skipping the crystal door puzzle. Now, I'm not going to spoil it here, but there was also a third route on this map that Eric revealed to me. I haven't played this route yet, but I know of it. I'll leave that to you guys to discover if you ever end up playing the campaign yourselves. I may have talked a lot about spoilers in this video, but there were still a lot of things I kept a secret. So far, this map already kicks ass, right? It does. But I haven't even gotten to my favorite part yet. Once you were in the treasure room, you were prompted to pick the middle chest. But there were two other chests. Why would Eric put these here? They must have had some kind of killer trap, considering that he warned us during the slim spot to pick the middle chest, or else. I already watched Mega play this map on his stream, so I already knew what was going to happen. But a lot of my viewers didn't. That's why I picked the wrong chest, and it just teleported me back to being in front of the chests. Wow, look at how harmless that was. We got some banter between Sneaky and Sturm about why they didn't pick the right chest when it was so obvious, so then the obvious next step was, let's do it again! I picked the wrong chest again, the same thing happened, but new banter was unlocked. I kept repeating the cycle after that. Sneaky and Sturm would gradually lose their sanity over me forcing them to pick the wrong chest over and over. Eventually, it got to the point where Sneaky and Sturm had enough of the player's shit, and they took the power of choice away from them. When that happened, the game only allowed you to pick the correct chest. But what if there was a way to get around that? Eric was active in my chat while this was happening, and I was about to leave with the painting when he told me to undo my turn to see even more wrong chest shenanigans. As it turned out, there was a secret space in the back of the room. I had no idea this was a thing until Eric called my attention to it. I missed it, Mega missed it, I'm sure others have missed it too. Examining this seemingly blank space got Sneaky to shout at me that I was interacting with nothing. But then I was able to select the space again. There's always another choice. If you kept picking the blank space, then even Rune himself pleaded with you to win the damn map already. I thought to myself if I should stop, but there was a burning desire within me to tempt fate. I kept going, and Sneaky and Sturm said they were sad. That was the biggest emotional blow thus far. Even Sneaky said in my chat that she was sad. Damn it! This pain was too real. I'm pretty sure that they called me an imbecile at some point as well. I was taking hits left and right, but I pressed on. I had to make it to the end of this cursed road. My curiosity refused to relent. My infernal perseverance eventually summoned Eric in full developer mode, and he had enough of my shit too. He altered the game itself to instruct me to end the Sneaky and Sturm Parable, which became our community's official name for this whole segment. I, of course, continued to defy Eric's orders. After this, Eric went full god mode on my ass with several displays of power, including filling the room with giants to threaten me. It even got bad enough to the point where Eric warned us to make a checkpoint before proceeding any further. I thought, okay, now is the point where we die if we pick the wrong chest, right? I was wrong again. If we did this a few more times, then Eric appeared in person to thank us? He was actually happy that we loved uncovering secrets enough to see this one through to the end. He then stole my line, and my character gave the exact same reaction I gave. He also gave the player an Iron Skin Solve, which gave your entire army invulnerability for a turn. It was absolutely unnecessary at this point in the map, but we already got our true reward. Several minutes of maddening laughter. Oh, and Mega randomly appeared too. Mega is always allowed to appear, because Mega is the coolest. Do you see why this was my favorite map in the game now? It was already a top 5 worthy map without the Sneaky and Sturm Parable. But with it, it became an immediate candidate for number 1. Every single aspect of the map, from the opening cutscene to the closing, was a joy inducer. It began a hero's journey, created mystery, introduced conflict, resolved conflict, foreshadowed future events, made me laugh, and provided multiple compelling challenges. If I had to nominate the map to represent this If I had to nominate a map to represent this campaign in a hypothetical tournament where judges compared each custom campaign's best map, I choose this one. On a related note, it was no secret that a lot of us in the community considered Sneaky and Sturm to be the main characters of this campaign. Eric did a sensational job writing for the vast majority of us, but I believe his best work was with Sneaky and Sturm's characters. He nailed their personalities, interests, and dynamic as friends, while also dialing them up to 11. All of these masterful factors combined together allowed this map to pull off the greatest heist of them all, the number 1 spot on my list. And there you have it. I've ranked all 19 maps of Eric's sequel campaign, in order. No regrets, no takebacks. If you disagree with my rankings, then I want to hear it in the comments. Feel free to let me know in the comments what your favorite maps were in the campaign, whether you played it yourself, watched me stream it, or watched Mega stream it. If any of you ever make a full ranking list or tier list for this campaign, then send me a link and I'll give you a shout out. On a related note, I'm seriously considering making more top 20 style videos in the future for games, chapters, characters, you name it. I've got one more speech about the campaigns to give though. The epilogue map is playing in the background right now, and it will serve as a perfect backdrop for what I'm about to say. Eric, my friend, the 2 campaigns you made were labors of love that honored us all in the community. The Insider era, the Chat Spike era, the Discord era, and every single mini era in between those eras got their due. Our history matters, because so many friendships were built back then that shaped us into the people we are now. I've been on our Discord server for almost 5 years now, roughly about as long as the time I've vanished from online spaces. Ever since my return to the community, I've rekindled old friendships and made several new ones. we are still sharing experiences, having fun, and changing our lives for the better, just like in the old days. That's why I put so much effort into my streams and videos of both campaigns. I wanted to honor our community in my own way and pay it forward. My stream of the first campaign inspired me to get back into content creation and finish my Let's Play of Ogre Battle. My stream of the second campaign inspired me to write a script that's about the same length as of Mice and Men. It feels surreal that I wrote a freaking book about a custom campaign made in the creation tools of an indie strategy game. What beast of a creation will I debut next? The sky is the limit. One thing's for sure though, my creative powers are stronger than ever. Thank you, Eric, for not only making hella fun campaigns, but also inspiring people to embrace their own creativity. I hope that one day, I inspire somebody's creativity the same way you've inspired me and others. I also sincerely hope that this campaign isn't the last game you ever create. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to make a Wargroove 3 campaign. Instead, hear me out. One day, your kids will grow up, and they won't need you as much anymore. They'll still need you, of course, but not as much. Your free time will eventually return, and you will be able to create again. It doesn't have to be a video game, but I do genuinely think that you are talented at game design. Whatever it ends up being, you deserve to partake in the joy of creation again too. Right now though, your family and your teaching take priority. I totally get that. Maybe you'll end up creating a revolutionary new lesson plan for your game design students. Creation takes many forms, and everyone deserves a creative outlet, including you. Now, I want to close the show by saying I'm grateful for all of my awesome friends and channel regulars who watched this Titanic video to the end. To take Eric for example, he's been supporting my idea for this video since the start, and he's been cheering me on to the finish line. You know how much I'm grateful for that, man. But I'm also grateful for all of you. Every view, every comment, every like, every subscription, and every Discord message you give me matters. Thank you so much for supporting me. I want to give you all more videos and more streams. I just need to get better. I just need to get better at not losing focus. There will be no more Wargroove content on my channel after this. At least until Chucklefish, Robotality, or someone else releases Wargroove 3. I have a feeling that we're not getting it anytime soon, if we ever get it at all. For the foreseeable future, I will be diving straight back into my Let's Play of Stranger of Paradise. And there will be no new playthrough projects here until that's finished. I hope you enjoyed my longest non-stream video ever, and I hope you'll join me again on the hunt for chaos.